I found out about my daughter's wedding the same way a stranger would, scrolling through Facebook at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep because my back was screaming and my mind wouldn't stop racing. There it was. A beautiful graphic with swirling gold letters and ivory roses. Join us as we celebrate the marriage of Emma Grace Thompson and Jonathan Reed. The date was set for 3 months away. A Saturday in June. The venue was that gorgeous estate on the edge of town, the one with the willow trees and the stone fountain that everyone dreams about for their special day. I stared at my phone screen until my eyes burned. I read it again. And again. Surely there was some mistake. Surely my only daughter, the girl I'd carried for 9 months, the child I'd raised alone after her father walked out when she was just 4 years old. Surely she wouldn't get engaged and set a wedding date without telling her own mother. But the post had been up for 6 hours. 63 likes already. Comments pouring in with congratulations and heart emojis. My sister had commented. My cousin had commented. Even my ex-husband's mother had commented, for God's sake, and she hadn't spoken to our family in over a decade. I sat there in my small bedroom, in the house I'd scraped and saved to buy after the divorce, surrounded by the kind of silence that feels like it's pressing on your chest, and I felt something crack inside me. Not break. Not yet. Just crack. Like ice on a lake at the beginning of spring, when you can still walk on it but you know it won't hold much longer. Before I go any further, I need you to do something for me. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family's life, if you've ever given everything to someone only to be cast aside when you were no longer convenient, leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And please, hit that subscribe button, because I'm going to tell you a story that will make your blood run cold and your heart race. Check the description box below for more stories like this. Stories about real people, real pain, and real revenge. Because what happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Not even me. My daughter Emma had always been difficult. I don't mean that in the casual way mothers sometimes complain about their teenage daughters being moody or rebellious. I mean difficult in a way that made me question everything I'd done as a parent, every choice I'd made, every sacrifice I'd thought was worthwhile. When she was little, she was my whole world. We were a team. After Richard left us, walked out on a Tuesday morning with nothing but a duffel bag and a note on the kitchen counter that said he needed to find himself, it was just Emma and me against everything. I worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. I worked the day shift at the hospital as a medical records clerk, and I worked nights and weekends cleaning offices downtown. I wore myself down to nothing so she could have dance lessons and summer camp and a college fund. Somewhere around her 16th birthday, everything changed. She became cold. Distant. Critical of everything I did. The way I dressed was embarrassing. The way I talked was mortifying. The car I drove was a joke. I told myself it was normal teenage stuff, that phase where kids have to push their parents away to become their own people. But it never stopped. When she went to college, I thought maybe the distance would help, that she'd grow up and realize how much I'd sacrificed for her. Instead, she just drifted further away. Phone calls became texts. Texts became silence. She graduated with a degree in marketing and got a good job at a firm in the city, and I was so proud I cried when she told me. She didn't invite me to her graduation. Said it was too complicated to get me a ticket. 3 years had passed since then. 3 years of me trying to bridge the gap, of me sending her birthday cards and Christmas gifts, of me calling and texting just to hear her voice, just to know she was okay. She'd respond sometimes. Brief. Polite. Like I was a distant aunt she felt obligated to acknowledge. And now this. A wedding. The biggest day of her life, and I had to find out about it on social media like I was nobody. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I lay in my bed and watched the ceiling fan go around and around, and I tried to make sense of it. Maybe she was planning to tell me. Maybe she just posted it early and was going to call me in the morning. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for why the whole world knew about her wedding before her own mother did. But morning came, and my phone stayed silent. I waited all day. I cleaned my house. I did laundry. I made myself lunch and couldn't eat it. I watched the clock and told myself that any minute now, she'd call. Any minute now, this would all make sense. By the time the sun started to set, I couldn't take it anymore. I called her. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. It rang 4 times, and I was sure she wasn't going to answer. But then she did. Her voice was casual, bright even. Like nothing was wrong. Hey, Mom. I tried to keep my voice steady. I tried so hard. but it came out strained, tight with all the hurt I was trying to hold back. Emma, sweetheart. I saw your post. About the wedding. I just wanted to say congratulations. There was a pause. Just a beat of silence, but I felt it like a punch. Oh. Yeah. Thanks. You're getting married. That's wonderful. I didn't know you were even seeing anyone seriously. Another pause. Yeah, well. It all happened pretty fast. Jonathan and I just clicked, you know? We didn't want to wait. I swallowed hard. My throat felt like it was closing up. I'd love to meet him. Maybe we could all have dinner sometime? Before the wedding. Yeah. Maybe. We're pretty busy with planning right now, though. There's just so much to do. I could hear it in her voice. That tone. The one that meant she was already trying to end the conversation, already thinking about hanging up and going back to whatever she'd been doing before I interrupted. But I had to ask. I had to know. Emma, honey, I haven't gotten an invitation yet. For the wedding. I know it's still a few months away, but I just want to make sure I have the right information. You know how unreliable the mail can be sometimes. The silence that followed was different. Heavier. I could hear her breathing. I could almost feel her deciding what to say, how to say it. Actually, Mom, about that. Jonathan and we've decided to keep the wedding really small. Intimate. Just close friends and immediate family. My heart was pounding now. My chest felt tight. I am immediate family, Emma. I'm your mother. I know you are. But, look, this is my day, okay? Mine and Jonathan's. And I really need it to be about us, not about all the family drama and history and everything. I just want it to be perfect, and I can't have any distractions. I couldn't breathe. I literally could not get air into my lungs. The words kept echoing in my head. Distractions. She called me a distraction. Are you, Emma, are you saying you don't want me at your wedding? She sighed. Like I was being difficult. Like I was the one being unreasonable. Don't make this about you, Mom. Please. This is my day. For once, can something not be about you? I didn't say anything. I couldn't. What do you say to something like that? What do you say when your daughter, your only child, the person you gave up everything for, tells you that you're not wanted at the most important day of her life? I have to go, she said finally. Jonathan just got home. We're going out to dinner. And then she hung up. Just like that. The line went dead, and I was sitting there in my kitchen, holding my phone, feeling like I'd just been erased from existence. I want to tell you that I broke down crying. That I fell apart right there. But I didn't. Instead, I laughed. It was a strange, hollow sound that didn't feel like it came from me. I laughed because the alternative was to scream, and I didn't have the energy for screaming anymore. I laughed because after all these years, after all the sacrifices and the late nights and the empty bank accounts and the loneliness, this was what I got. This was my reward for being a mother. To be uninvited from my own daughter's wedding because I was a distraction. I set my phone down on the counter and I looked around my kitchen. At the refrigerator covered in old photos of Emma as a little girl. Emma in her dance recital costume. Emma on her first day of school. Emma blowing out birthday candles, gap-toothed and grinning. I looked at those photos and I barely recognized the woman who'd taken them. That woman had been so full of hope. So full of love. So certain that everything she was going through would be worth it someday. That night, I took every single photo off that refrigerator. I put them in a box in the closet. And I made myself a promise. If Emma wanted to pretend I didn't exist, if she wanted to erase me from her life, then fine. I would let her. But I wasn't going to cry about it anymore. I wasn't going to beg for her love. I was done. I was finally, completely done. But here's the thing about being done. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean the hurt goes away. It just means you start channeling it into something else. Something colder. Something more patient. I didn't know it yet, but that night in my kitchen, laughing that hollow laugh while my heart broke into pieces, that was the night everything changed. That was the night I stopped being the mother who would forgive anything and started being the woman who would forget nothing. 3 months. That's how long I had. 3 months until Emma's perfect wedding day. 3 months of silence while she planned and posted and celebrated with everyone except me. 3 months of watching from the outside while my daughter built a life that didn't include me. I didn't waste a single one of those days. The first thing I did was exactly what you'd expect a hurt, angry mother to do. I stalked my daughter's social media like it was a full-time job. Every post, every photo, every comment. I created a fake account, some generic name with a stock photo of a sunset, and I followed Emma and all her friends. I watched her engagement photos roll in, professional shots taken in that park downtown with the gazebo and the rose garden. She looked beautiful, happy. Her fiancé Jonathan had his arm around her waist, pulling her close, both of them laughing at something the photographer must have said. In every single photo, they looked perfect together. But I wasn't looking at Emma. Not really. I was looking at him. Jonathan Reed. I needed to know who this man was, this person who was supposedly so important that he was worth erasing me from my daughter's life for. His profile was public, thank God, and he was one of those people who posted constantly. Gym selfies. Inspirational quotes about success and grinding. Photos of expensive dinners and bottles of wine I knew cost more than my car payment. He worked in real estate development, some big firm that built luxury condos and commercial properties. He drove a BMW. He wore expensive suits. On the surface, he looked like exactly the kind of man a mother should want for her daughter. Successful, handsome, confident. But I've been around long enough to know that surfaces lie. I've been around long enough to know that the people who try the hardest to look perfect are usually the ones with the most to hide. So I dug deeper. I spent hours going through his posts, going back months, then years. And that's when I started to notice patterns. Little things at first. Comments from friends that seemed off. Inside jokes that had an edge to them. References to nights that got out of hand and what happened in Vegas and never doing that again. Photos with other women, carefully cropped or tagged and then untagged. And then I found the ex-girlfriend. Her name was Vanessa Ortiz. She'd been tagged in dozens of Jonathan's photos from about 2 years ago, and then suddenly, nothing. Just a complete stop. No explanation. No farewell post. She just vanished from his social media like she'd never existed. But her profile was still public, and when I went to look, I found something that made my skin crawl. There was one post, from about 18 months ago. No photo. Just text. It said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Getting out was the hardest thing I ever did, but I'm finally free. If you're in a situation where you feel scared, please reach out. There's help. You're not alone." The post had hundreds of comments. Friends offering support. Strangers sharing their own stories. And when I read through them, really read them, I saw references to what he did and "you deserved so much better and I'm so glad you got away safely." Nothing specific. Nothing that would hold up in any kind of official way. But enough. Enough to paint a picture. Enough to make my stomach turn. I need to pause here for a second because I know some of you watching this have been in situations like this. Maybe you saw warning signs in someone you loved. Maybe you tried to speak up and nobody listened. If you've ever been there, if you know what it's like to see danger coming and feel completely powerless to stop it, please share this video. Please leave a comment. Check the description for more stories like this, because we need to talk about these things. We need to share our experiences so other people know they're not alone. Now let me continue, because this is where things started to get really complicated. I sat with that information for days. I didn't know what to do with it. Part of me wanted to call Emma immediately, to show her what I'd found, to beg her to reconsider. But I knew how that would go. She'd tell me I was being dramatic, that I was trying to ruin her happiness, that I was making everything about me again. She'd cut me off completely, and then I'd have no way of knowing what was happening. No way of protecting her if things went wrong. And another part of me, the part that was still hurt and angry about being excluded from the wedding, that part wanted to do nothing. Wanted to let her make her own mistakes and learn her own lessons the hard way. After all, she'd made it clear she didn't need me, didn't want me. So why should I care? But here's the thing about being a mother. Even when your child breaks your heart, even when they treat you like you're nothing, even when they make it clear they'd rather you didn't exist, you still can't turn off that instinct to protect them. It's hardwired into you at a cellular level. So I kept digging. I reached out to people. I found Vanessa's profile and I sent her a message from my fake account. I kept it vague. Said I was a friend of a friend, that I'd seen her post about getting out of a bad situation, that I was worried about someone currently dating her ex. I didn't mention Jonathan by name. Didn't mention Emma. I just asked if she'd be willing to talk. She responded 2 days later. Her message was cautious but kind. She said she appreciated me reaching out, but she didn't really want to talk about her past relationship. She'd moved on. She was in therapy. She was focusing on healing. But then she said something that I'll never forget. She said, "If someone you care about is involved with him, please just tell them to be careful. Tell them to pay attention to how he acts when he doesn't get his way. Tell them to watch how he treats service workers and people he thinks are beneath him. Tell them that love shouldn't feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells." That's all I can say. I thanked her and I sat there staring at that message for a long time. Walking on eggshells. How many times had I felt that way in my own life? With Richard, before he left. Always watching my words, monitoring my tone, trying not to set him off. I'd promised myself I'd never live like that again, and here was my daughter, about to marry someone who might make her feel exactly the same way. The weeks crawled by. Emma posted constantly about wedding planning. Pictures of dress fittings and cake tastings and flower arrangements. She posted about her bridal shower, held at some fancy restaurant downtown, and I could see from the photos that my sister was there. My cousin was there. Richard's mother was there. Everyone except me. I watched it all from behind my fake profile, invisible and powerless, and I felt something inside me start to harden. Not break. Not crack anymore. Harden. Like metal that's been through fire and come out stronger and colder on the other side. I started going to the places I knew Emma and Jonathan went. Not to confront them. Not to cause a scene. Just to observe. I'd sit in coffee shops and pretend to read a book while I watched them through the window at the restaurant across the street. I'd park my car outside the apartment building where they lived and watch them come and go. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds crazy and obsessive and probably a dozen other things. But I needed to see for myself. I needed to know if what I suspected was true. And slowly, piece by piece, I started to see it. The way Jonathan would snap at Emma in public when he thought nobody was paying attention. The way he'd grip her arm a little too tight when they were walking. The way her smile would fade the second his back was turned. I saw them argue outside a movie theater once, and he got right up in her face, his finger jabbing at her chest, his jaw clenched. She stood there and took it, her shoulders hunched, her head down, and when it was over she followed him to the car like nothing had happened. I wanted to run across the street. I wanted to grab her and shake her and tell her to wake up, to see what she was doing, to understand that this man was going to hurt her in ways she couldn't even imagine yet. But I didn't. Because I knew she wouldn't listen. I knew she'd see me as the enemy, as the mother who couldn't let go, as the distraction she'd already decided I was. So I waited. I watched. I documented. I took photos and videos on my phone. I kept a journal of every incident I witnessed, every red flag, every moment that made my skin crawl. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with all this information. I just knew I needed to have it. Because some part of me, some deep maternal instinct, knew that eventually, Emma was going to need me. Eventually, this perfect fantasy she'd built was going to come crashing down, and when it did, I needed to be ready. The wedding invitations started arriving in people's mailboxes about 6 weeks before the big day. I knew because I saw the posts. People taking pictures of the beautiful cream-colored envelopes with the gold wax seals. Emma must have spent a fortune on them. I watched people post about what they were going to wear, about travel arrangements, about how excited they were to celebrate. And I waited for mine. Even though she'd told me I wasn't invited. Even though she'd made it clear I was a distraction. Some stupid, hopeful part of me thought maybe she'd change her mind. Maybe she'd realize she'd made a mistake. Maybe, at the last minute, there'd be an envelope in my mailbox with my name on it and everything would be okay. There wasn't. The weeks turned into days. The days turned into hours. I watched the countdown on Emma's social media. 10 days until the wedding. 7 days. 5 days. The posts got more excited, more frantic. Emma posted about her bachelorette party, some weekend trip to wine country with all her friends. They all wore matching pink shirts and took pictures in front of vineyards. My sister was there. I could see her in the background of one photo, laughing, holding a glass of champagne. She hadn't called me. Hadn't even sent a text to see how I was doing, knowing I'd been excluded from all of this. 3 days before the wedding, I went to the grocery store and I ran into one of Emma's old high school friends. Melissa. She'd been at our house 100 times when the girls were younger. She saw me in the produce section and her face went pale. She tried to pretend she hadn't seen me, turning quickly toward the apples, but I walked right up to her. I said hello. I asked how she was doing. And I watched her squirm. I'm going to Emma's wedding on Saturday, she said finally, like the words were being pulled out of her. I'm really excited for her. That's wonderful, I said. My voice was calm. Pleasant. I'd gotten good at hiding what I really felt. I hope you have a beautiful time. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Pity. Or maybe guilt. Or maybe just discomfort at being caught between a mother and daughter's war. I'm sorry you're not. I mean, I'm sure Emma has her reasons. I'm sure she does, I said. And I smiled. And then I walked away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed and I thought about everything. About Emma as a little girl, holding my hand as we crossed the street. About Emma at 10, crying in my arms after she fell off her bike and scraped her knee. About Emma at 15, screaming that she hated me during some argument I can't even remember anymore. About Emma now, about to walk down the aisle to marry a man I was certain was going to hurt her, and I wasn't even going to be there to watch. The wedding was 2 days away. 2 days until my daughter's perfect day. 2 days until she got everything she wanted while I sat at home, uninvited and invisible. I thought about calling her one more time. I thought about begging. I thought about showing up at the venue anyway, forcing her to acknowledge me, making the scene she was so afraid I'd make. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I got up, I made myself a cup of tea, and I sat at my kitchen table in the dark. And I waited. Because deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I knew. I knew this wasn't going to end the way Emma thought it was. I knew that something was going to go wrong. Call it intuition. Call it a mother's instinct. Call it whatever you want. But I knew. And when it did, I was going to be ready. The day before the wedding, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to church. Not because I'm particularly religious. I'd stopped going regularly after Richard left, when I was too busy working 2 jobs to have time for Sunday services. But I needed somewhere quiet. Somewhere I could think. Somewhere I could sit with all the anger and hurt and fear that was churning inside me like a storm that wouldn't break. The church was nearly empty on that Friday afternoon. Just me and an older woman in the front pew, her head bowed in prayer, and the smell of incense still lingering in the air from some earlier service. I sat in the back and I stared up at the stained glass windows, at the colored light filtering through and making patterns on the worn wooden pews, and I tried to pray. I tried to ask God or the universe or whoever might be listening to protect my daughter, to watch over her, to keep her safe even though I couldn't be there to do it myself. But the prayers wouldn't come. The words stuck in my throat. Because what I really wanted to pray for wasn't Emma's safety or happiness. What I really wanted was for this wedding not to happen. What I really wanted was for Emma to wake up and see the truth about Jonathan before it was too late. What I really wanted was for her to come to me, to apologize, to tell me she'd made a terrible mistake and she needed her mother. And I knew that was selfish. I knew that made me a bad person, maybe even a bad mother. But I couldn't help it. I couldn't help wanting something, anything, to stop this freight train I could see coming but couldn't do anything to derail. I left the church after about an hour and I drove home in a daze. My phone buzzed a few times, texts from friends asking if I was okay, if I needed company, if I wanted to meet for coffee or dinner. Everyone knew about the wedding. Everyone knew I wasn't invited. Some people had called to express their outrage on my behalf. Others had tried to play devil's advocate, suggesting that maybe Emma needed space, maybe this was just something she had to work through, maybe I should respect her wishes even if I didn't agree with them. I'd stopped responding to most of these messages. What was there to say? When I got home, I found myself doing something I'd promised myself I wouldn't do. I opened that box of photos I'd taken down from my refrigerator. The ones of Emma as a child. I spread them out on my kitchen table and I looked at each one, really looked, trying to figure out where everything had gone so wrong. When had I lost her? When had I become the enemy instead of the person she turned to when things got hard? There was one photo that made me cry, really cry, for the first time in weeks. Emma must have been 7 or 8. She's wearing this ridiculous Halloween costume I'd made for her. She wanted to be a sunflower that year, and I'd stayed up half the night sewing yellow petals onto an old sweatshirt. In the photo, she's beaming up at the camera, missing 2 front teeth, holding her trick-or-treat bucket in one hand and grabbing my hand with the other. You can't see my face in the photo, just my arm and hand holding hers. But I remember that moment. I remember how proud she was of that costume. I remember how she'd insisted on wearing it to school for 3 days after Halloween. I remember how she told me I was the best mom in the world. What happened to that little girl? Where did she go? My phone buzzed again. This time it was my sister, Claire. The message said, "Are you doing okay? I know tomorrow is going to be hard. Call me if you need to talk." I stared at that message for a long time. Claire was going to the wedding. Claire had been invited. Claire had probably helped Emma plan parts of it, had probably been at the bridal shower and the dress fittings and all those other events I'd been excluded from. And now she wanted to check on me. Now she wanted to make sure I was okay. I typed back, "I'm fine. Have fun tomorrow." She responded immediately, "I feel terrible about this whole situation. Emma is being really unfair to you." I didn't respond. Because if Claire really felt that terrible, she would have told Emma she wasn't going to attend unless I was invited. She would have stood up for me. She would have done something besides send me a text message the day before the wedding to ease her own guilt. The afternoon dragged on. I tried to distract myself. I cleaned my house even though it was already clean. I made dinner even though I wasn't hungry. I turned on the TV and flipped through channels without really seeing anything. And all the while, my phone kept buzzing with notifications. Emma was posting constantly. Last-minute wedding prep. Photos of her getting her nails done, her hair styled in a trial run for tomorrow. Photos of the bridesmaids all together, wearing matching robes and drinking champagne. Photos of the venue, with workers setting up chairs and hanging lights and arranging flowers. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as it should be. Everything except the gaping hole where a mother should have been. That evening, around 8 o'clock, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I was so tired of talking to people, so tired of explaining or defending or justifying. But something made me pick up. Maybe curiosity. Maybe hope. Maybe just the need to hear a voice that wasn't the one in my own head telling me I'd failed as a mother. "Hello. Is this Rebecca Thompson?" A woman's voice. Young. Hesitant. "Yes. Who's this?" "My name is Vanessa Ortiz. You sent me a message a few weeks ago. About Jonathan." My heart started pounding. I sat up straight on my couch, suddenly alert. Yes. Yes, I remember. Thank you for calling." There was a pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could almost feel her deciding whether to continue. "I've been thinking about your message a lot," she said finally. "About whether I should reach out. I told myself it wasn't my business anymore, that I'd moved on and I needed to stay moved on. But then today I was scrolling through social media and I saw the wedding posts. I saw your daughter. And I couldn't not call. I couldn't live with myself if something happened and I'd stayed silent." "What do you want to tell me?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Jonathan is dangerous. Not in the obvious ways. He doesn't hit you right away. He doesn't start with violence. He starts with control. Small things. Telling you what to wear because he wants you to look good for him. Checking your phone because he says he just wants to feel close to you. Isolating you from your friends because they don't understand your relationship. It's so subtle that you don't even realize it's happening until you're completely trapped." My hands were shaking. I gripped the phone tighter. "Did he hurt you?" "Emotionally? Every single day. Physically? Twice. Once he grabbed my hair and slammed my head into a wall because I talked to a male coworker at a company party. Once he choked me until I blacked out because I told him I wanted to break up. Both times he apologized after. Cried. Told me he didn't know what came over him. Promised he'd get help. He never did. I felt sick. Literally nauseous. Why didn't you report him?" "I did. I filed a police report after the choking incident. But he has money. He has lawyers. He convinced the cops that I'd attacked him first, that he was defending himself. He had a tiny scratch on his arm that his lawyer said proved I'd been violent. My bruises didn't matter. The photos I'd taken didn't matter. Nothing mattered except his word against mine, and his word came with a better attorney. The charges were dropped. And after that, I was too scared to try again. I just wanted out. I moved to a different city. I changed my phone number. I started over. Before you continue watching, I need you to understand something. What Vanessa told me that night changed everything. If you or someone you love has ever been in a controlling relationship, if you've ever felt like you were losing yourself to someone who claimed to love you, please leave a comment. Share this video. Check the description for resources and more stories like this. We need to talk about these things. We need to break the silence. Now let me tell you what happened next, because this is where my choice became clear. Is there anything I can do? I asked Vanessa. Anything I can show my daughter that might make her see the truth? The truth is, she probably already sees it. She just doesn't want to admit it. When you're in it, you make excuses. You tell yourself it's not that bad. You convince yourself that you can change him, that your love will be enough. It won't be. It never is with men like Jonathan. But she has to figure that out herself. All you can do is make sure she knows you're there when she's ready to leave. Because she will be ready eventually. They all are. The question is just how much damage gets done before that moment comes. We talked for almost an hour. Vanessa told me things that made my blood run cold. Details about Jonathan's temper, his need for control, his ability to manipulate people into thinking he was the victim. She told me about the time he'd convinced all their mutual friends that she was unstable, that she'd made up the abuse allegations because she was jealous and vindictive. She told me about the months of therapy it had taken to rebuild her sense of self, to stop blaming herself, to understand that what happened wasn't her fault. When we finally hung up, I sat in the darkness of my living room and I felt something shift inside me. The anger was still there. The hurt was still there. But there was something else now too. A cold, clear certainty. Emma might not want me at her wedding. She might think I was a distraction, an embarrassment, someone to be erased from her perfect day. But whether she wanted me or not, whether she knew it or not, she was going to need me. Soon. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not next week. But eventually, this fairy tale she'd constructed was going to crumble, and when it did, I was going to be there. Ready. Waiting. Prepared to do whatever it took to get my daughter away from this man. I spent the rest of the night gathering everything I had on Jonathan. Every photo I'd taken. Every note I'd made. Every screenshot of social media posts that had raised red flags. I put it all in a folder and I saved it in 3 different places: my computer, a USB drive, and the cloud. I didn't know if I'd ever need it. But if I did, I wanted to be ready. Around midnight, I allowed myself to look at Emma's social media one more time. She'd posted a photo of herself in bed, face mask on, eyes closed. The caption said, "Last night as a single woman. Tomorrow I marry my best friend. I can't wait to start our forever." The comments were full of heart emojis and congratulations. Someone had written, "Your mom must be so proud." Emma hadn't responded to that one. I closed the app. I turned off my phone. And I sat in the silence of my house, thinking about tomorrow. Tomorrow my daughter would walk down the aisle without me there to see it. Tomorrow she would marry a man who I knew, absolutely knew, was going to hurt her. Tomorrow she would start a life that didn't include me except as a footnote, a distraction, someone to be forgotten. But I wasn't going to forget. I wasn't going to disappear just because she wanted me to. I was going to be here, in the shadows, watching and waiting and ready. Because that's what mothers do. Even when their children break their hearts. Even when their children don't want them. Even when their children would rather pretend they don't exist. We protect them anyway. Whether they know it or not. Whether they want us to or not. I went to bed that night with no intention of sleeping. I lay there in the dark and I counted down the hours. In 12 hours, Emma would be getting her hair and makeup done. In 15 hours, she'd be putting on her wedding dress. In 18 hours, she'd be walking down the aisle. And I would be here. In this house. Alone. Uninvited. Invisible. But not powerless. Not anymore. I woke up at dawn on Saturday, even though I'd barely slept. My body was running on adrenaline and anxiety and something else I couldn't quite name. A strange, electric anticipation, like standing on the edge of a cliff and knowing you're about to jump but not knowing if there's water below or rocks. The sky outside my bedroom window was that pale grey blue that comes just before sunrise, and I lay there watching the light change, listening to the birds starting their morning songs, feeling completely disconnected from the world. Today was my daughter's wedding day. And I was going to spend it alone. I got up and made coffee. Strong, black, the way I'd learned to drink it during those years of working 2 jobs when I needed the caffeine just to function. I sat at my kitchen table and I tried to imagine what Emma was doing right now. Probably still asleep in her apartment, Jonathan beside her. Or maybe she was already awake, too excited or nervous to sleep. Maybe she was thinking about the day ahead, about the dress and the flowers and the moment she'd walk down the aisle. Maybe, somewhere in the back of her mind, she was thinking about me. Probably not. I'd decided what I was going to do with this day. I was going to act like it was any other Saturday. I was going to pretend that my daughter wasn't getting married without me. I was going to keep myself busy and distracted, and I was absolutely, definitely not going to look at social media. I was not going to torture myself by watching other people post photos from the wedding I wasn't invited to. I was going to maintain my dignity. I was going to be fine. That lasted until about 9 in the morning. I'd cleaned my kitchen. I'd done a load of laundry. I'd weeded the garden. And then I made the mistake of picking up my phone just to check the time, and I saw the notification. Emma had posted a photo. Just one. It was a picture of her wedding dress hanging in her bedroom, backlit by the morning sun coming through the window. The caption said, "It's happening. In 8 hours I'll be Mrs. Reed." Mrs. Reed. She was taking his name. Of course she was. Erasing Thompson. Erasing me even further. I put the phone down. Picked it back up. Put it down again. I made it almost 15 minutes before I gave in and opened Instagram. And once I started looking, I couldn't stop. Emma's bridesmaids were posting. My sister was posting. Even people I barely knew were posting. Photos of champagne glasses. And makeup bags and dresses on hangers. Photos of the venue with its willow trees and stone fountain, looking absolutely magical in the morning light. Photos of Emma laughing, her hair in rollers, surrounded by her friends. She looked so happy. So genuinely, radiantly happy. And I felt something crack inside me all over again. Because she was my daughter. My little girl. And she was having the most important morning of her life, and I wasn't there. I wasn't the one helping her into her dress. I wasn't the one fixing her veil or touching up her makeup or holding her hand and telling her how beautiful she looked. Someone else was doing those things. My sister, probably. Or Jonathan's mother. Or one of the bridesmaids. Anyone. Everyone. Just not me. I need to stop here for a moment because this is important. If you've ever been excluded from a major life event by someone you love, if you've ever had to watch from the sidelines while everyone else celebrated something you should have been a part of, then you know this pain. It's not just sadness. It's not just disappointment. It's this deep, consuming ache that makes you question everything about yourself and your relationships and whether anything you thought was true actually was. If you know that feeling, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. And please, share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. Check the description for more content like this, because what happened next? It changed everything. The morning dragged on. I tried to read a book and couldn't focus on the words. I tried to watch TV and couldn't follow the plot. I ended up just sitting on my couch, phone in hand, refreshing social media over and over like I was addicted to my own pain. The posts kept coming. Emma with her makeup done, looking absolutely stunning. Emma in her wedding dress, the photo taken from behind so you couldn't see her face, just the cascade of lace and the long train. Emma with her bridesmaids, all of them in dusty rose dresses, holding bouquets of white roses and eucalyptus. Around noon, my sister called. I stared at her name on my screen for a long moment before I answered. "What do you want, Claire?" "I just wanted to check on you. Make sure you're okay." "I'm fine." "Rebecca, I know this is hard. Do you?" I cut her off. My voice was sharper than I'd intended, but I was past caring. "Do you really know how hard this is? Because from where I'm sitting, you seem to be having a great time at my daughter's wedding while I sit at home alone. That's not fair. You know I tried to talk to Emma about this. I told her she was making a mistake by not inviting you. But not enough of a mistake for you to boycott the wedding in solidarity with your own sister." Silence on the other end. Then, "She's my niece, Rebecca. What was I supposed to do?" "I don't know, Claire. Something. Anything. You could have done literally anything instead of just going along with it and then calling me on the day of to ease your own guilt. I'm trying to be here for you." Well, don't. I don't need your pity. I need you to go. Go be at the wedding. Go take pictures and post them online and celebrate Emma's big day. Just leave me alone. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking. I felt terrible for snapping at her, but I also felt strangely satisfied. Like I'd finally given voice to some of the anger that had been building for months. The afternoon was worse than the morning. As the wedding time approached, 4 o'clock, Emma had posted, ceremony at 4. I felt myself getting more and more anxious. I paced around my house. I tried to convince myself not to look at my phone. I failed, repeatedly. People were starting to arrive at the venue. I could see them in the background of photos. The parking area filling up with cars. Guests in their formal wear, smiling and chatting. The ceremony space set up with rows of white chairs and an arch covered in flowers. At 3:45, I made a decision I knew I'd probably regret. I got in my car and I drove toward the venue. Not to crash the wedding. Not to make a scene. Just to be close. Just to be able to say that I was there, even if Emma didn't know it. Even if nobody knew it. The estate was about 20 minutes from my house. I parked on a side road about a quarter-mile away, where I could see the entrance but was far enough away that nobody would notice me. I sat in my car with the windows down, listening to the sounds of summer, cicadas buzzing, birds calling, the distant hum of traffic from the highway. And I waited. At 4 o'clock, I imagined Emma walking down the aisle. I imagined the music starting. I imagined everyone standing and turning to watch her. I imagined her face, probably glowing with happiness, eyes locked on Jonathan waiting for her at the altar. I imagined my sister crying. I imagined Richard's mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I imagined all the people who were there, who were witnessing this moment, who were part of this memory that Emma would carry for the rest of her life. And I imagined the empty space where I should have been sitting. The mother of the bride's seat, given to someone else or left vacant. A hole in the shape of me. I sat in my car and I cried. Really cried, for the first time since this whole nightmare began. I cried for the little girl in the sunflower costume who'd held my hand and told me I was the best mom in the world. I cried for all the years I'd worked myself to exhaustion trying to give her a good life. I cried for the relationship we'd once had and lost. I cried for the future I'd imagined, where I'd be at my daughter's wedding, where we'd have that mother-daughter dance, where she'd thank me in her speech and mean it. All of that was gone now. Dead. Erased. I cried until I couldn't cry anymore, and then I just sat there in the silence, feeling empty and hollow and completely alone. Around 4:30, my phone started buzzing. Text messages coming in rapid succession. At first I thought maybe someone had spotted me. Maybe I'd been caught lurking near the venue like some kind of stalker. But when I looked at my phone, I saw that the messages weren't addressed to me. They were in a group chat, the one my sister had created months ago for family updates, the one I'd muted but never left. The messages were frantic. Oh my God. What is happening? Someone call someone. This is insane. My heart started pounding. I opened the chat and scrolled up, trying to figure out what was going on. And then I saw it. A photo. Blurry, taken in haste, but clear enough to make out the scene. The reception area. Tables overturned. Chairs scattered. And in the center of it all, Jonathan with his hand tangled in Emma's hair, pulling her head back, her face twisted in pain and shock. Someone else was trying to pull him off her. People were screaming. It was chaos. The next message was from my cousin. The wedding is off. The groom attacked Emma. Police are here. I stared at my phone. Read the message again. And again. The wedding is off. The groom attacked Emma. My first thought wasn't "I told you so." It wasn't satisfaction or vindication. It was pure, primal terror. My daughter was in danger. My daughter was hurt. My daughter needed me. I started my car and I drove toward the venue, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. More messages were coming in. More photos. Video clips. I couldn't look at them while driving, but I could hear my phone buzzing over and over, a constant stream of updates from people who were there, who were witnessing my daughter's wedding day turn into a nightmare. I pulled into the venue's parking lot and I could see the chaos even from a distance. Police cars with lights flashing. Ambulance. People standing in clusters, some crying, some on their phones, everyone looking shocked and horrified. I parked and I ran toward the crowd, pushing through people who tried to stop me, who tried to tell me something I couldn't hear over the roaring in my ears. Emma. I was screaming her name. Where's Emma? Someone grabbed my arm. My sister. Her makeup was running down her face. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in the last hour. Rebecca, thank God. She's over here. She's asking for you. She led me through the crowd to where Emma was sitting on a low stone wall near the fountain. Her wedding dress was torn. Her hair was a mess, half of it pulled out of the elaborate updo she'd had done. There was a red mark on her face that was already starting to bruise. A paramedic was trying to examine her, but she kept pushing him away, kept looking around frantically, and when she saw me, when our eyes met, her face just crumpled. Mom, she sobbed. Just that one word. But it contained everything. All the pain. All the fear. All the regret. All the need. I ran to her. I pulled her into my arms and she collapsed against me, crying so hard her whole body was shaking. I held her and I stroked her hair and I murmured the things mothers say when their children are hurting. I'm here. I've got you. You're safe now. I'm here. Around us, police were talking to witnesses. People were giving statements. I caught glimpses of Jonathan being led away in handcuffs, shouting something I couldn't make out. Someone told me later that the fight had started during the reception, before they'd even cut the cake. Jonathan had been drinking. Someone had made a joke about him being whipped now that he was married. He'd laughed it off at first, but then Emma had said something, nobody seemed to know what, and he'd snapped. Just completely lost control. Grabbed her by the hair. Slammed her against a table. Started screaming at her in front of everyone. It had taken 3 groomsmen to pull him off her. The wedding photographer had caught some of it on camera before he'd dropped his equipment and run to help. The photos and videos were already spreading online. People who weren't even at the wedding were seeing it. Emma's perfect day, her carefully planned fairy tale, was being broadcast to the world in the form of her husband, her brand new husband, assaulting her in front of all their friends and family. I held my daughter and I felt all the anger I'd been carrying for months start to dissolve. Not disappear. Not completely. But shift into something else. Something more complicated. Because yes, she'd hurt me. Yes, she'd excluded me and dismissed me and treated me like I was nothing. But she was still my child. She was still the little girl in the sunflower costume. She was still my Emma, underneath all the pain and the mistakes and the poor choices. I'm so sorry, she kept saying between sobs. Mom, I'm so sorry. You were right. You tried to warn me and I didn't listen. I'm so sorry. Sure, I whispered. We'll talk about all that later. Right now I just need you to be okay. A police officer approached us, asking Emma if she wanted to press charges. She looked up at me, her face a mess of tears and smeared makeup and fear, and I saw in her eyes that she didn't know what to do. She was lost. Completely, utterly lost. And that's when I realized something. This was my moment. This was what I'd been waiting for, even if I hadn't known I was waiting for it. My daughter was broken and scared and she needed someone to tell her what to do. She needed someone to take control. She needed me. But I also realized something else. Something darker. Something I'm not entirely proud of, but I can't deny either. I had power now. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever in our relationship, I had complete and total power over my daughter. She had pushed me away, rejected me, tried to erase me from her life. And now she needed me so desperately that she'd do anything I told her to. Believe anything I said. Follow me anywhere. I could be the bigger person. I could comfort her and support her and help her file charges against Jonathan and rebuild her life. I could be the mother she needed, the one she should have let me be all along. Or I could make her understand what she'd done to me. I could make her feel, really feel, the consequences of her choices. I could let her sit with her fear and her regret just a little bit longer. I could hold my forgiveness just out of reach, the way she'd held her wedding just out of my reach. I could make her beg for my love the way I'd been silently begging for hers. I looked at my daughter, and I made my choice. I told Emma we were leaving. I told the police officer she'd come to the station tomorrow to give a statement, that she was too traumatized to do it right now. I told my sister and the paramedics and everyone else who tried to talk to us that we needed space, that Emma needed to get away from this place. And then I took my daughter by the hand, led her to my car, and drove her home. Not to her apartment. To my house. The house she'd grown up in. The house she'd been so embarrassed by when she was a teenager. The house she hadn't visited in over a year. She didn't argue. She just sat in the passenger seat, still wearing her torn wedding dress, staring out the window in silence. I glanced over at her a few times during the drive and I felt something twist in my chest. She looked so small. So young. Like the little girl she'd been, before everything got complicated, before she learned how to hurt me with words and silence. When we got to my house, I helped her inside and took her straight to the bathroom. I ran a bath, hot enough to steam up the mirror, and I left her alone to wash away the day. While she was in there, I went to her old bedroom, the room I'd kept exactly as she'd left it, even though she told me multiple times to get rid of her stuff, that she didn't need it anymore, and I found some old clothes that might still fit. Sweatpants. A t-shirt from her high school volleyball team. I laid them out on the bed and then I went to the kitchen to make tea. My phone was exploding. Messages from my sister, from cousins, from friends, from people I barely knew. Everyone wanted to know what was happening, if Emma was okay, what I was going to do. I turned the phone off. For the first time in months, I just shut it all off. This moment was mine. Mine and Emma's. Nobody else got to be part of it. When Emma came out of the bathroom 45 minutes later, her skin was red from scrubbing and her eyes were swollen from crying. She'd managed to get most of the pins and flowers out of her hair, but it still looked like a disaster. She saw the clothes I'd laid out and something in her face softened, just for a moment. Recognition. Maybe. Or memory. Or gratitude. She got dressed and came to find me in the kitchen. I handed her a cup of tea, chamomile with honey, the way she'd liked it as a child when she couldn't sleep, and she took it with trembling hands. Mom, Not yet, I said. My voice was gentle but firm. Drink your tea first. Then we'll talk. We sat at my kitchen table in silence. The same table where we'd had so many meals when she was growing up. The same table where she'd done homework while I cooked dinner after working all day. The same table where she told me, at 16, that she wished Dad had taken her with him when he left. The same table where, at 21, she told me she was moving out and didn't need my help with rent even though I'd offered. So many memories, layered on top of each other like sediment. Emma finished her tea and set the cup down. Her hands were still shaking. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were so full of pain and confusion that I almost broke. Almost let go of the small, cold part of me that wanted her to suffer just a little bit more. Almost. I don't know what happened, she said finally. Her voice was hoarse from crying. One minute everything was perfect. The next minute he changed. Like someone flipped a switch. I've never seen him like that before, Mom. I swear. If I'd known he could be that way, I never would have. She trailed off. Couldn't finish the sentence. And I had a choice. I could tell her the truth right now. I could tell her about Vanessa. About the research I'd done. About all the red flags I'd seen. I could make her understand that I'd known. I'd tried to warn her in my own way, I'd seen this coming. But I didn't. Instead, I reached across the table and took her hand. Did he ever hurt you before today? She was quiet for a long moment. Too long. And in that silence, I had my answer. Not like that, she said finally. He'd grab me sometimes. When he was angry. But it never felt violent, you know? It just felt like he was trying to get my attention. And he always apologized after. Always said he didn't mean to. That he loved me and he was just so passionate about us that sometimes he couldn't control himself. Every word out of her mouth made me want to scream. This is what men like Jonathan did. They trained women to explain away abuse. To minimize it. To blame themselves for it. Emma had been caught in that trap and she hadn't even realized it until it was too late. Emma, sweetheart, that's not love. That's control. That's abuse. It doesn't matter if he apologized. It doesn't matter what explanation he gave. He hurt you. More than once, from the sound of it. And today he did it in front of everyone because he felt safe enough to. Because he thought you belonged to him now. She started crying again. Silent tears running down her face. I'm so stupid. I'm so stupid. Everyone probably thinks I'm an idiot for not seeing it. You're not stupid. You're human. And men like Jonathan are very, very good at making women think their abuse is love. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something dawn in her eyes. A question she was afraid to ask but needed to. Did you know? Is that why? Is that why you were so weird about the wedding? Here it was. The moment. I could tell her everything. I could explain about the research and Vanessa's phone call and all the warning signs I'd documented. I could make her see that I'd been trying to protect her all along, that my exclusion from the wedding had hurt but that her safety had mattered more. Instead, I said, I had concerns. About Jonathan. About how fast everything was moving. But you made it clear you didn't want my input. You made it clear I was a distraction. She flinched like I'd slapped her. Mom, about that. About not inviting you. I was so wrong. I don't even know why I did it. Jonathan kept saying that we needed to start our marriage fresh, without any family drama, without any negativity. He said you'd always been jealous of my success, that you'd try to make the wedding about you instead of about us. And I believed him. I'm so sorry. I believed him and I pushed you away and now. Now you need me, I finished for her. She nodded, tears streaming faster now. Yes. I need you. I'm sorry it took this for me to see it, but I need you, Mom. Please. Please don't push me away now. I know I don't deserve your help. I know I treated you terribly. But please. And there it was. My daughter. Begging. My daughter, who'd been so certain she didn't need me, now completely dependent on me. I had all the power. I could give her what she needed, or I could withhold it. I could comfort her, or I could make her work for my forgiveness. I could be the mother she needed, or I could be the mother who taught her a lesson about consequences. Listen, I need you to understand something before I continue. What I did next isn't something I'm proud of. It isn't something I'd recommend to anyone else. But I need you to understand the context. I need you to understand months and months of hurt and rejection and being made to feel like I was worthless. I need you to understand what it feels like to be erased from your child's life and then suddenly be desperately needed when things fall apart. If you've been there, if you understand that specific kind of pain, please comment below. Share this video. Check the description for more stories like this, because what I'm about to tell you is complicated and messy and very, very human. I looked at my daughter, at her tear-stained face and her desperate eyes, and I felt a war happening inside me. The mother who loved her beyond reason. The woman who'd been deeply, profoundly hurt by her. They were fighting for control, those two parts of me, and I wasn't sure which one was going to win. You're going to stay here for a while, I said finally. You're not going back to that apartment you shared with Jonathan. You're going to file a police report tomorrow. You're going to get a restraining order. You're going to start the process of annulling this marriage before it even really begins. And you're going to do all of that with me by your side. Do you understand? She nodded frantically. Yes. Yes, I'll do whatever you think is best. And Emma, we're going to have some very honest conversations about the last few years. About the way you treated me. About the wedding. About Jonathan. About all of it. Because I love you, and I'm going to help you through this, but I'm not going to pretend the past didn't happen. I'm not going to act like everything is fine when it's not. She looked shocked. I'd never spoken to her like this before. I'd always been so careful with her, so afraid of pushing her further away. But I was done being careful. I was done walking on eggshells around my own daughter. Okay, she whispered. Okay, Mom. Whatever you need. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I stood up and walked around the table. I pulled her into my arms and held her while she cried. And while I held her, while I stroked her hair and murmured comfort, I felt that cold, hard part of me start to thaw. Not all the way. Not yet. But enough. Enough to remember that this was my child. Enough to remember that revenge might feel good in the moment, but it wouldn't heal either of us. Enough to remember that love, real love, isn't about power or control or making someone pay for the hurt they caused you. Real love is about showing up even when it's hard. Even when you're still angry. Even when every instinct says to protect yourself by pushing them away. We stood there in my kitchen for a long time, holding each other, and slowly the day started to catch up with me. The fear. The adrenaline. The relief that Emma was safe. The complicated mix of vindication and heartbreak that came from being right about Jonathan in the worst possible way. Let's get you to bed, I said finally. You need to rest. Tomorrow is going to be a very long day. I helped her to her old bedroom and I tucked her into bed the way I used to when she was little. I sat on the edge of the mattress and I brushed her hair back from her face, and for a moment, just a moment, She looked like that little girl again. The one who'd thought I was the best mom in the world. Mom. Her voice was small. Uncertain. Yes, sweetheart. Why were you there today? At the wedding? Claire said you were there when it happened, but I thought you were staying home. I thought you said you weren't coming. I froze. I hadn't told Emma I'd been parked near the venue. Claire must have mentioned it, or someone else had seen me. I couldn't stay away, I admitted. I knew you didn't want me there, but it was your wedding day. I needed to be close, even if you didn't know it. Even if I was just sitting in my car down the road. I needed to know you were okay. New tears filled her eyes. You were there. You were watching over me even after everything I did. Even after I told you not to come. That's what mothers do, Emma. We don't stop loving our children just because they hurt us. We don't stop protecting them just because they push us away. She closed her eyes and more tears leaked out. I don't deserve you. Maybe not, I said, and there was an edge to my voice I couldn't quite hide. But you're stuck with me anyway. I turned off the light and left her alone to sleep. I went to my own room and I finally turned my phone back on. The messages were overwhelming. Hundreds of them. People wanting updates, wanting gossip, wanting to know all the details of Emma's disaster wedding. I ignored them all except one. It was from Vanessa. She'd seen the news, the story had already made it to social media, videos and photos spreading like wildfire. Her message was simple. I saw what happened. Is your daughter okay? I'm so sorry I couldn't stop this. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to help. I typed back. She's safe. She's with me. Thank you for trying to warn us. Thank you for calling me. Her response came a few minutes later. Tell her it's not her fault. Tell her she's not alone. Tell her it gets better, but only if she stays away from him. Don't let her go back. No matter what he promises. Don't let her go back. I promised I wouldn't. And then I set my phone aside and I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, processing everything that had happened. My daughter's wedding had imploded in the most spectacular way possible. Her perfect fairy tale had turned into a public nightmare. Her marriage had lasted less than an hour before her husband had assaulted her in front of everyone they knew. And somehow, despite everything, despite the exclusion and the hurt and the anger, here we were. Back in this house together. Mother and daughter. Bound by blood and love and a trauma that neither of us had seen coming, but both of us would have to find a way to survive. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt like I'd won something, like justice had been served. But I didn't. I just felt tired. Bone deep, soul-crushing tired. And sad. So incredibly sad for Emma, for the innocence she'd lost, for the future she'd imagined that had died today along with her marriage. Tomorrow we'd deal with the police and the lawyers and the fallout. Tomorrow we'd start the long process of putting Emma's life back together. Tomorrow I'd help my daughter learn how to be strong again, how to trust herself again, how to believe that she deserved better than what Jonathan had given her. But tonight I just lay in the darkness and listened to the house settle around me. And I thanked whatever force in the universe had made me drive to that venue, had put me there at the exact moment my daughter needed me most, had given me the chance to be her mother again. Even if the price of that chance had been her complete destruction. I woke up early the next morning, even though my body was screaming for more sleep. Old habits from those years of working multiple jobs. Once you train yourself to function on 4 or 5 hours of sleep, it's hard to break the pattern even decades later. I lay in bed for a few minutes, letting my brain catch up with reality. Yesterday had happened. Emma was sleeping in her old room. Jonathan was probably in jail. The wedding that was supposed to be the beginning of Emma's perfect life had instead been the worst day she'd ever experienced. I got up and made coffee, then stood at my kitchen window watching the sunrise. It was going to be a beautiful day. Sunny, warm, the kind of June morning that makes people plan picnics and outdoor weddings. The irony wasn't lost on me. Around 7, I heard movement from Emma's room. I waited, listening to the sounds of her getting up, using the bathroom, moving around. When she finally emerged, she looked worse than she had last night. The bruise on her face had darkened overnight, a deep purple that made my stomach turn. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She was still wearing the old volleyball shirt and sweatpants I'd given her, and she looked so young, so vulnerable, that I had to resist the urge to pull her into my arms and never let go. "Morning," I said softly. "How did you sleep?" "I didn't really." Her voice was rough. I kept having nightmares. I'd wake up and forget where I was, forget what happened, and then I'd remember and... She trailed off, wrapping her arms around herself. Come sit. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table again, that same table that seemed to be the stage for every important conversation we'd ever had. Emma wrapped her hands around her coffee mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth, even though it was already getting hot outside. We need to go to the police station today, I said. We need to file that report while everything is still fresh. She nodded but didn't look up from her coffee. Emma, I need you to tell me the truth about something. And I need you to really think before you answer. Was yesterday the first time Jonathan physically hurt you? The first time it was that obvious, that violent? She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. No. But it was the first time he did it in front of other people. Usually he was more careful, more controlled. He'd wait until we were alone. And it was never as bad as yesterday. It was grabbing, pushing. Once he backed me into a corner and put his hands around my throat, but he didn't squeeze. He just held them there, told me he could if he wanted to, that I should remember that. Every word made me feel sicker. When did this start? About 6 months ago, maybe longer. It's hard to remember exactly when it crossed the line from him just being intense and passionate to him actually being violent. It happened so gradually. A grab here, a shove there. And he always apologized after. Always had an explanation. He was stressed about work. I'd said something that triggered him. He'd had too much to drink. There was always a reason, and the reason was always somehow connected to me doing something wrong. Did you tell anyone? Before yesterday? She shook her head. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. I kept thinking I could fix it. That if I just loved him better, if I just stopped doing the things that set him off, he'd go back to the man I fell in love with. That's not how it works, Emma. People like Jonathan, they don't change because you love them harder. They change when they decide to get help, and even then it's not guaranteed. But what they definitely don't do is stop abusing their partners just because those partners are perfect enough. She started crying again. Silent tears that dripped into her coffee. The wedding, she said after a minute. Not inviting you. That was him too. He convinced me that you were toxic, that you'd always been jealous of me, that you'd find a way to ruin my day if I let you come. He said I had to choose between him and you, and I chose him. I actually chose him over my own mother. And there it was. The confirmation I'd suspected but hadn't been sure of. Jonathan had isolated Emma from me deliberately. It was textbook abuse. Cut them off from their support system. Make them depend entirely on you. Make them think that everyone else is the problem. Why didn't you question it? I asked. And there was hurt in my voice. I couldn't help it. Why didn't you stop and think that maybe, just maybe, the man you'd known for barely a year was wrong about the mother who'd raised you for your entire life? Emma flinched. Because I wanted to believe him. Because believing him meant I could blame you for all the distance between us instead of taking responsibility for my own choices. It was easier to make you the villain than to admit I'd been pulling away from you for years. That I'd been ashamed of where I came from, of our old house and your old car and the fact that you'd worked as a cleaner. Jonathan came from money. His family had connections. And when I was with him, I felt like I'd finally made it, like I'd become someone important. And I convinced myself that meant leaving behind everything that reminded me of being less than that. Her words cut deep, but at least they were honest. At least she was finally telling me the truth instead of pretending or making excuses. Do you know how much that hurt? I asked quietly. Do you have any idea what it felt like to watch you be ashamed of me? To know that everything I'd sacrificed to give you opportunities, to send you to college, to make sure you had a better life than I did, that all of that just made you want to distance yourself from me. I know, Mom. And I'm so sorry. I can't take back the things I said or the way I treated you. I can't undo not inviting you to my wedding. All I can do is tell you that I was wrong, that I was horrible, and that I understand if you can't forgive me. I looked at my daughter, at her bruised face and her broken spirit, and I felt that war inside me start up again. The part of me that wanted to hold on to the hurt, that wanted to make her understand the depth of the pain she'd caused. And the part that just wanted to put all of it behind us and start over. We're going to have to work through this, I said finally. Both of us. Me forgiving you. You understanding why what you did was so damaging. This isn't something we can fix in one conversation over coffee. This is going to take time. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll go to therapy. I'll listen to everything you need to say. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if that's what you need. Right now what I need is for you to get dressed so we can go to the police station. We can deal with our relationship after we deal with making sure Jonathan can't hurt you again. She nodded and went to get ready. While she was gone, I called the police station and asked about filing a report. They told me to come in whenever we were ready, that they already had statements from multiple witnesses from yesterday and they'd arrested Jonathan at the scene. He'd spent the night in jail and would be arraigned tomorrow. They needed Emma's statement to add to the case. When Emma came back out, she'd put on some of her old clothes that still fit, jeans and a button-down shirt. She'd pulled her hair back into a ponytail and tried to cover the bruise with makeup, but it was still visible. She looked like she was going to face a firing squad. Ready? I asked. No. But let's go anyway. The police station was exactly what you'd expect. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, the smell of old coffee and desperation. We were led to a small room where a detective, a woman probably in her late 30s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, asked Emma to tell her everything. And Emma did. She started from the beginning, from how she and Jonathan had met at a work conference 18 months ago, how charming he'd been, how quickly things had moved. She told them about the first time he'd grabbed her roughly, about the escalating pattern of control and violence, about yesterday's explosion at the wedding. The detective took notes and asked clarifying questions. She was gentle but thorough. When Emma got to the part about Jonathan threatening her, about him putting his hands around her throat, the detective's expression hardened. That's strangulation, she said. In many states, that's now classified as a felony, not a misdemeanor. It shows intent to cause serious harm or death. The fact that he didn't actually squeeze doesn't matter. The threat itself is enough. Emma looked shocked. I didn't know that. I thought because he didn't actually hurt me that time, it didn't count. It counts. All of it counts. And with the witnesses from yesterday, with the photos and videos that have been circulating, we have a very strong case against him. But I need to know, are you prepared to follow through with this? Are you prepared to testify if it goes to trial? Because men like Jonathan, especially men with money and good lawyers, they'll try to make this go away. They'll offer plea deals. They'll try to paint you as unstable or vindictive. You need to be absolutely certain you're ready for that fight. Emma looked at me. I reached over and took her hand. I'm ready, she said. Whatever it takes. I'm ready. We spent almost 3 hours at the police station. By the time we left, Emma had given a complete statement, had photos taken of her injuries, and had started the process of getting a restraining order. The detective told us that Jonathan would likely be released on bail after his arraignment, but the restraining order would mean he couldn't come near Emma or contact her in any way. What about my stuff? Emma asked as we walked to my car. All my things are at the apartment we shared. My clothes, my laptop, everything. We'll get it, I said. But not alone. We'll take my sister and maybe a police escort if necessary. You're not going anywhere near that apartment without protection. She nodded, looking exhausted. The adrenaline that had been keeping her going was clearly starting to wear off. Before we continue, I need to tell you something. If you're watching this and you're in a situation like Emma was in, if someone is hurting you, controlling you, making you feel like you're the problem, please get help. Please tell someone. Please don't wait until it escalates to the point where you're in real danger. Check the description below for resources and hotline numbers. Share this video if you think it might help someone else recognize the warning signs. Comment below with words of support for anyone who needs them. Because this is real. This happens to real people every single day. And the only way we stop it is by talking about it. When we got home, Emma collapsed on the couch and fell asleep almost immediately. I covered her with a blanket and let her rest. While she slept, I finally started responding to some of the messages I'd been ignoring. I texted my sister and told her what was happening, that Emma was safe and staying with me, that we'd gone to the police. Claire immediately called, crying, apologizing for not doing more, for going to the wedding, for not standing up for me sooner. I let her apologize. I didn't forgive her, not completely, but I let her know that we had bigger problems to deal with right now than our relationship. What can I do to help? She asked. Emma needs to get her things from the apartment she shared with Jonathan. Can you help us do that? Maybe tomorrow or the next day? Of course. Absolutely. Whatever you need. I also called my ex-husband, Richard. He needed to know what had happened to his daughter, even if he hadn't been particularly involved in her life for the past 20 years. He answered on the fourth ring, sounding distracted. Rebecca, is everything okay? No, Richard, everything is not okay. Emma got married yesterday. I know. She sent me an invitation. I couldn't make it, work thing in Seattle, but I sent a generous check. She got married yesterday, I interrupted, and her husband attacked her in front of everyone at the reception. She's got bruises on her face and she's staying with me and there's a restraining order and a police investigation. So no, everything is definitely not okay. Silence on the other end. Then, Jesus Christ. Is she safe? She's safe now. She's here. But she could use her father checking in on her. If you can manage to fit that into your busy schedule. I heard him take a breath, probably about to defend himself or make excuses, but then he just said, I'll call her. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I'll call today. You tell her yourself, Richard. I'm done being your messenger. I hung up before he could respond. It felt good. After all these years of trying to smooth things over between Emma and her father, of making excuses for his absence, of pretending his sporadic interest in his daughter's life was enough, I was done. Emma was an adult now. If Richard wanted a relationship with her, he could do the work himself. The rest of the day was quiet. Emma slept for hours, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion. I busied myself around the house, doing laundry, making soup for dinner, trying to create some sense of normalcy in a situation that was anything but normal. My phone kept buzzing with notifications. The videos and photos from the wedding were going viral. People were calling it the worst wedding disaster ever. Entertainment websites were picking up the story. There were think pieces being written about domestic violence and warning signs and how everyone at that wedding should have done more to protect Emma. It made me sick. My daughter's trauma was being turned into content, into clickbait, into something for strangers to comment on and share and dissect. But there was nothing I could do about it. Once something is on the internet, it's out there forever. Emma would have to live with the fact that millions of people had seen the worst moment of her life. That her humiliation and pain had been broadcast to the world. Around 6 that evening, Emma finally woke up. She looked disoriented at first, like she couldn't remember where she was or why she was there. Then I saw it all come back to her, the memory crashing over her like a wave. Her face crumpled and I thought she was going to start crying again, but she took a deep breath and held it together. How long was I asleep? Almost 5 hours. I made soup. Are you hungry? She shook her head. I don't think I can eat. But I'll try. We ate dinner in silence. Or rather, I ate and Emma pushed food around her bowl. After a while she gave up pretending and just sat there, staring at nothing. Your dad called, I said. While you were sleeping. He wants to talk to you. She looked surprised. Dad called? I didn't think he. I sent him an invitation but I didn't really expect him to care about any of this. He cares. In his own limited way. But he wants to talk to you himself. When you're ready. She nodded vaguely, like she was filing that information away to deal with later. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you stay? After Dad left. You could have. I don't know, dated, remarried, had a whole other life. But you just stayed single and focused on raising me. Why? It was a good question. One I'd asked myself many times over the years. Because after your father, I didn't trust my own judgment anymore. I'd married someone who I thought loved me, who I thought was a good man, and he walked out on us without even trying to make it work. I was so angry at him, but I was also angry at myself for not seeing it coming. For not being enough to make him want to stay. And I decided that the safest thing, the best thing for both of us, was to just focus on being your mom. I didn't need romance or partnership. I just needed to make sure you were okay. That must have been lonely. It was. But it was also safe. And after everything with your father, safe felt more important than anything else. Emma looked at me with something like understanding. I get that now. I get why you choose safe. After Jonathan, I can't imagine ever trusting anyone again. I can't imagine ever wanting to be with someone. The thought of it makes me feel sick. That's normal. That's how you're supposed to feel right now. But Emma, I don't want you to end up like me. I don't want you to close yourself off from love for the next 30 years because you picked wrong once. Yes, you need time to heal. Yes, you need to be careful. But don't let Jonathan steal your ability to trust, your ability to open your heart. Don't let him take that from you too. She looked like she wanted to believe me, but couldn't quite manage it. How do you ever trust yourself again? How do you know you won't make the same mistake? You learn. You go to therapy. You figure out what made you vulnerable to someone like Jonathan in the first place. And then you work on those things so that next time, you recognize the red flags before you're in too deep. Were there red flags? With Jonathan? That I missed. And here it was again. Another chance to tell her everything. To explain about Vanessa, about my research, about all the warnings I'd seen. Another chance to say I told you so in the most direct way possible. But I didn't. Not yet. Because Emma was fragile right now, barely holding it together, and piling on more evidence of her bad judgment felt cruel. There would be time for those conversations later. Time for her to understand the full extent of what she'd missed. Right now she just needed to feel safe. There were red flags, I said carefully. But men like Jonathan are experts at hiding them. They're experts at making you think you're overreacting, that you're being too sensitive, that you're the problem. It takes experience to recognize the patterns. You didn't have that experience. Now you do. She nodded slowly. I'm never going to be that stupid again. You weren't stupid, Emma. You were inexperienced. There's a difference. We finished dinner and cleaned up the kitchen together. It felt almost normal, the two of us moving around each other in this familiar space, washing dishes and putting things away. For a moment I could almost pretend that this was just a regular evening, that Emma was just visiting, that tomorrow she'd go back to her own life and I'd go back to mine. But then I'd catch sight of the bruise on her face, or I'd see the way she jumped when a car door slammed outside, or I'd notice how she kept checking her phone like she was expecting Jonathan to somehow contact her despite the restraining order. And I'd remember that nothing about this was normal. That we were living in the aftermath of a trauma. That the road ahead was going to be long and difficult. That night, as Emma was getting ready for bed, she stopped in the doorway of her room and looked at me. Mom? Thank you. For being there yesterday. For taking me in. For not saying I told you so even though you have every right to. I'm your mother, I said simply. This is what mothers do. She started to cry again, and I held her, and I wondered how many more times we'd repeat this scene before she started to heal. How many more times she'd break down and need to be put back together. How many more times I'd have to be strong for both of us when all I wanted was to fall apart myself. But I didn't fall apart. I held my daughter and I made her promises, that she was safe, that she was loved, that we would get through this together. And I meant every word. Even if part of me was still hurt. Even if part of me was still angry about everything that had happened before yesterday. Even if part of me wondered if Emma would have come back to me at all if her perfect life hadn't imploded so spectacularly. Those were questions for another day. Questions I'd have to work through in my own therapy, my own processing. Right now, all that mattered was that my daughter needed me. And this time, finally, I was there. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and emotional breakdowns. Emma's annulment lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia who specialized in domestic violence cases, explained that getting the marriage annulled would be relatively straightforward given the circumstances. The assault had happened on the wedding day itself, there was video evidence, there were hundreds of witnesses, and Jonathan had been arrested. The marriage could be declared void on the grounds of fraud and duress. Jonathan had hidden his abusive nature until Emma was legally bound to him. These cases are actually more common than you'd think, Patricia told us during our consultation in her downtown office. Abusers often wait until after the wedding to escalate because they feel like they finally have their victim locked down. The marriage certificate becomes another form of control. Emma sat beside me in Patricia's office, looking small and defeated. She'd been wearing sunglasses everywhere we went, trying to hide the bruise that had spread from her cheek down to her jaw. People stared anyway. Some because they recognized her from the viral videos. Others just because a young woman in sunglasses indoors with visible injuries tells its own story. How long will this take? Emma asked, her voice flat. If Jonathan doesn't contest it, which given the circumstances he'd be insane to do, We could have this wrapped up in a few weeks. The state has expedited processes for cases involving domestic violence. And if he does contest it? Patricia's expression hardened. Then we go to court and we show a judge all the evidence. The videos, the witness statements, the police report, the photos of your injuries. Trust me, no judge is going to force you to stay married to a man who assaulted you on your wedding day. Emma nodded mechanically. She'd been like this since the police station, going through the motions, doing what needed to be done, but disconnected. Like she was watching her own life happen from a distance. After the lawyer's office, we went to the apartment Emma had shared with Jonathan. My sister Claire met us there, along with 2 police officers who'd agreed to supervise while Emma collected her belongings. The officers had assured us that Jonathan wasn't allowed anywhere near the building. He was out on bail, but the restraining order was in effect. Still, my heart was pounding as we took the elevator up to the 3rd floor. The apartment was exactly what I'd expected. Sleek, modern, expensive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. The kind of place that looks perfect in photos but feels cold and sterile in person. Emma's things were mixed with Jonathan's, her books on his shelves, her clothes in his closet. Evidence of a life they'd been building together, now being dismantled. I can't believe I lived here, Emma said, standing in the doorway like she was afraid to enter. I can't believe I was happy here. You weren't happy, I said gently. You were performing happiness. There's a difference. She nodded and we got to work. Claire and I packed while Emma directed, telling us what was hers and what could be left behind. Sometimes she'd pick something up, a decorative pillow, a picture frame, and she'd just stare at it, lost in some memory. He gave me this, she said at one point, holding a small ceramic vase. On our 3-month anniversary. Said it reminded him of me because it was delicate and beautiful and needed to be handled with care. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I thought it was romantic. Now I realize he was telling me exactly who he was. That he saw me as something fragile that belonged to him. Something he could break if he wasn't careful. Or if he wanted to. She threw the vase in the trash. We found things that made my skin crawl. A journal where Emma had written entries that were clearly meant to convince herself she was happy. Jonathan was stressed about work today and he yelled at me, but I know he didn't mean it. He loves me so much. I need to be better about not questioning him. He's right that I'm too sensitive sometimes. Page after page of Emma gaslighting herself, of Jonathan's voice in her head telling her that his abuse was her fault. We found texts on an old phone Emma had left in a drawer. Messages from friends asking if she was okay, saying they missed her, wondering why she never wanted to hang out anymore. And Emma's responses, always making excuses. Jonathan and I are just really focused on our relationship right now. I've been so busy with wedding planning. Maybe next month. The pattern was clear. Jonathan had isolated her completely, and she'd let him. We found photos that Jonathan had taken of Emma. Hundreds of them. Some were normal couple photos. But others were clearly meant to control her. Photos of her in various outfits with his comments written on the back. Too revealing, don't wear this out. Perfect, this is how you should always look. Why would you even buy this? You know I hate when you dress like this. He'd been cataloguing her wardrobe, controlling what she wore, turning her body into something he had approval rights over. Claire found them first and her face went white. Emma, what is this? Emma looked at the photos and something inside her seemed to break all over again. She sank down onto the couch and put her head in her hands. He said he was helping me develop my style. He said he had better taste than I did, that he was just trying to make me look my best. And I believed him. I actually thanked him for caring enough to help me. I wanted to throw something. I wanted to scream. But instead I knelt in front of my daughter and I made her look at me. This is not your fault. None of this is your fault. He manipulated you. He gaslit you. He slowly broke down your sense of self until you didn't trust your own judgment anymore. That's what abusers do. They're experts at it. And you are not stupid or weak for falling for it. You're human. I should have seen it. Everyone's going to think I should have seen it. I don't care what everyone thinks. I care about you. And right now, we need to get your things and get out of this place. You never have to come back here. Never. We packed for 3 hours. Box after box of Emma's life, Evidence of the person she'd been trying to become while she was with Jonathan. The designer clothes he'd encouraged her to buy. The expensive makeup. The books on being a better partner, on understanding men, on making your relationship work. She'd been trying so hard to be perfect for him. To be enough for him. Not realizing that with men like Jonathan, you could never be enough. The problem was never her. The problem was always him. As we were loading the last boxes into my car, one of the officers approached me. I just want you to know, we've dealt with a lot of domestic violence cases. What your daughter's doing, pressing charges, getting out, not going back, that takes incredible courage. Most victims go back multiple times before they finally leave for good. The fact that she's doing this after one incident shows real strength. It wasn't one incident, I said quietly. It was the first public incident. There were others before. She just hid them well. The officer nodded grimly. That's usually how it goes. But she's out now. And with the evidence we have, there's a good chance he'll do real time for this. The strangulation threat alone could get him years. Adding the assault at the wedding on top of that, he's looking at serious consequences. I wanted to feel vindicated. I wanted to feel like justice was being served. But mostly I just felt tired and sad. Punishing Jonathan wouldn't undo what he'd done to Emma. It wouldn't give her back the months she'd spent walking on eggshells. It wouldn't erase the bruises or the fear or the shame. But it might save the next woman. And that had to count for something. We got back to my house and unloaded all of Emma's things into her old bedroom. The room was so small compared to the apartment she'd been living in. The bed was a full instead of a king. The closet was tiny. But Emma looked around and something in her face softened. I forgot how safe I felt in this room, she said. When I was a teenager and everything felt so overwhelming, I could come in here and close the door and it was like the whole world just stopped. You're safe here now too, I told her. For as long as you need. That night, I made Emma's favorite dinner from when she was a kid, spaghetti with meat sauce, garlic bread, Caesar salad. Comfort food. The kind of meal that tastes like home and childhood and being taken care of. She actually ate this time, not a lot, but more than she'd managed in days. After dinner, we sat on the couch together and I finally asked the question I'd been holding back. Emma, I need to know something. And I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you really not want me at your wedding? Or was that all Jonathan? She was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. It was both. Jonathan planted the idea, but I ran with it. He'd say things like your mom always makes everything about her or your mom is so negative, she'll bring down the whole vibe and at first I'd defend you. But then he'd point out times when you'd been critical of him, or times when you'd seemed distant, and he'd weave this whole narrative about how you were jealous of my success, of my happiness, of the fact that I'd found someone when you'd been alone for so long. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. And the worst part is, part of me wanted to believe it. Because I'd been feeling guilty for years about pulling away from you, about being embarrassed by where we came from, about wanting a different life than the one you'd given me. And if you were the problem, if you were toxic and jealous and trying to hold me back, then I didn't have to feel guilty anymore. I could make you the villain and I could be the victim who'd overcome her difficult childhood. It was so much easier than admitting the truth. Which was that I was ashamed. That I'd become the kind of person who values money and status over the people who actually love her. That I'd let a man I barely knew convince me to cut out my own mother because it made his life easier. That I'd been a terrible daughter and I knew it and I didn't want to face it. Her honesty was like a knife. It hurt to hear. But it was also what I'd needed. What we'd both needed. Because we couldn't move forward if we kept pretending. We couldn't heal if we didn't acknowledge the wounds. Thank you for telling me the truth, I said finally. Are you going to forgive me? I took a breath. Eventually. But Emma, you need to understand, what you did really hurt me. For months I watched you build this life that didn't include me. I watched you celebrate with everyone except me. And then when everything fell apart, suddenly I was needed again. That's hard. It makes me feel like I'm only valuable to you when you're in crisis. That's not true. That's not. Let me finish. I know you love me. I know you need me. But we need to work on our relationship in therapy, both of us together. Because I can't go back to being the mother who you only call when you need something. I can't go back to walking on eggshells, afraid that if I say the wrong thing you'll cut me out of your life again. If we're going to rebuild this, we need to do it the right way. With honesty and boundaries and real communication. She nodded, crying openly now. I'll do whatever you want. Whatever you need. I just don't want to lose you again. You're not going to lose me. I'm your mother. I'm not going anywhere. But we have work to do. Both of us. We sat together in silence for a while, letting the weight of the conversation settle. Then Emma's phone buzzed. She looked at it and her face went pale. What is it? It's from a number I don't recognize. But the message. She handed me the phone. The message read, "You can get a restraining order but you can't hide forever. We need to talk. You owe me that much. I love you. I'm sorry. Please." Jonathan. He was using a different number to get around the restraining order. Don't respond, I said immediately. We need to forward this to the police and to Patricia. This is a violation. He says he loves me, Emma said, and there was something in her voice that terrified me. Something soft. Something uncertain. Emma, look at me. He doesn't love you. People who love you don't hurt you. People who love you don't isolate you from your family. People who love you don't grab your hair and assault you in front of everyone you know. That's not love. That's possession. That's control. But what if he really is sorry? What if? No. My voice was sharp now. No. This is what he does. This is part of the cycle. He hurts you, then he love bombs you and apologizes and promises to change. And maybe he's good for a few days or a few weeks. But then it happens again, and it's always worse than the time before. You cannot go back to him. Do you understand me? You cannot. She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. And that's when I realized something terrifying. Despite everything that had happened. Despite the bruises and the police report and the viral videos and the shame. Some part of Emma was still vulnerable to him. Some part of her still wanted to believe that he could change, that their love story could have a happy ending. I'd thought getting her away from Jonathan was the hard part. Now I realized that keeping her away from him was going to be even harder. Because abuse doesn't end when you leave. The trauma lives in your head. The patterns are ingrained. The manipulation continues even when the abuser isn't physically present. This was going to be a longer fight than I'd anticipated. And I needed to be ready for it. Jonathan didn't stop with one text message. Over the next week, they came constantly. Different numbers every time. He must have been using burner phones or apps that disguised his real number. The messages followed a pattern. First came the apologies. Long, rambling texts about how sorry he was, how he'd never meant to hurt her, how he was getting help, seeing a therapist, going to anger management. How he'd been under so much stress with work and wedding planning and he'd just snapped but it would never happen again. When Emma didn't respond to those, the messages changed. They became desperate. Pleading. He talked about their memories together, their first date, the night he'd proposed, all the plans they'd made for their future. He sent her photos of them together, happy moments she'd posted on social media back when she thought she was living a fairy tale. He told her he couldn't live without her. That she was his everything. That he'd die if she didn't give him another chance. And when those didn't work, the messages turned ugly. She was ungrateful. She was throwing away everything they'd built over one mistake. She was letting her mother poison her mind against him. She was going to regret this. She was making a huge mistake and she'd realize it when it was too late and he'd moved on and she was alone forever. Every message was a violation of the restraining order. Every message got forwarded to the police and to Patricia. Every message was more evidence for the criminal case being built against him. But that didn't make them any less effective at messing with Emma's head. I watched my daughter struggle. Some days she was strong. She'd delete the messages without reading them. She'd talk about moving forward, about being grateful she got out when she did, about building a new life. Those were the good days. Other days, she'd read and reread the messages. She'd cry over the photos he sent. She'd say things like maybe I overreacted, or maybe it wasn't as bad as everyone's making it seem, or maybe he really is getting help. Those were the days that terrified me. We started therapy, both individual sessions for each of us and joint mother-daughter sessions. Emma's therapist, Dr. Chen, was a specialist in trauma and domestic violence. She explained to Emma that what she was experiencing was normal. Trauma bonding is real, Dr. Chen said in one of their sessions that I was invited to attend. When someone alternates between abuse and affection, It creates an incredibly powerful psychological bond. Your brain gets addicted to the highs of when he's being loving, and it starts to minimize the lows of when he's being abusive. That's why victims go back an average of 7 times before leaving for good. It's not weakness. It's neuroscience. But I don't want to go back, Emma insisted. I know what he is. I know what he did. Knowing intellectually and feeling emotionally are 2 different things, Dr. Chen explained. Right now your brain is going through withdrawal from the relationship. You're going to have cravings. You're going to have moments where you forget why you left and you only remember the good times. That's normal. The key is recognizing those moments for what they are and not acting on them. Emma nodded, but I could see the struggle in her eyes. She wanted to be strong. She wanted to be the woman who left and never looked back. But it wasn't that simple. Nothing ever is. Richard came to visit one weekend. He'd been calling regularly since finding out what happened, which was more involvement than he'd shown in Emma's life in years. When he arrived at my house, still handsome in that aging well way that successful men somehow manage, still wearing expensive clothes and driving an expensive car, I felt all the old anger rise up in my throat. "Rebecca," he said, giving me an awkward hug. "Thank you for taking care of her." "I'm her mother," I said coldly. "It's what I do. It's what I've always done." He had the grace to look ashamed. I know I haven't been. I should have been more present. For both of you." 20 years too late for that conversation, Richard. Emma came out then, saving him from having to respond. She looked nervous, like she wasn't sure how to be around her father after all these years of distance. He pulled her into a hug and she let him, but I could see how stiff she was, how uncomfortable. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," he said. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." They went out for coffee, just the 2 of them. I'd suggested giving them time alone together, hoping maybe Richard could help reinforce the message that going back to Jonathan would be a terrible idea. When they came back a few hours later, Emma looked emotionally exhausted and Richard looked shaken. "She told me everything," he said quietly while Emma was in the bathroom. "About the control, the abuse, how long it was going on. Jesus, Rebecca, how did this happen? How did we not see it?" "You didn't see it because you weren't here to see anything," I said. "You've been a part-time father at best. You don't get to show up now and act shocked that bad things happened while you were absent. That's not fair." "Fair? You want to talk about fair? I raised our daughter alone. I worked myself to exhaustion to give her opportunities. And when she started pulling away, when she started dating someone I had concerns about, I had no backup. I had no one to help me guide her. Because you were off living your life, pretending you didn't have a family unless it was convenient for you." He looked like I'd slapped him. Good. Let him feel a fraction of what I'd felt all these years. "You're right," he said finally. "You're absolutely right. I was a terrible father. I am a terrible father. And I can't undo that. But I'm here now. And I want to help. What can I do?" I wanted to tell him there was nothing he could do, that he'd missed his chance to be useful decades ago. But I looked at Emma when she came back into the room, and I saw how her face had softened just slightly after spending time with her father. As angry as I was at Richard, as much as I resented him for everything he hadn't done, Emma needed all the support she could get right now. Even from someone who barely deserved to call himself her parent. "You can be consistent," I said. "You can call her. You can check in. You can show up when you say you will. You can actually be a father for once in your life." He nodded. "I can do that. I will do that." Whether he would actually follow through remained to be seen. But for Emma's sake, I hoped he would. 2 weeks after the wedding, Jonathan's lawyer reached out to Patricia with a plea deal offer. If Emma agreed to drop the charges, Jonathan would agree to the annulment, wouldn't contest it, and would leave her alone. He'd even agree to extended terms on the restraining order, 5 years instead of the standard 1 year. "What do you think?" Patricia asked during the phone call where she'd presented the offer. Emma looked at me. We were sitting in my kitchen again, that table that had seen so many conversations. I could see the temptation in her eyes. The easy way out. Just agree to the deal and this whole nightmare would be over. No trial. No testifying. No reliving the worst day of her life in front of strangers. But I also knew what message that would send. That men like Jonathan could buy their way out of consequences. That abuse was a civil matter, not a criminal one. That as long as you apologized and agreed to leave your victim alone, you could escape real punishment. What do you want to do? I asked Emma, even though I knew what I wanted her to say. I don't know. Part of me just wants this to be over. I'm so tired, Mom. I'm so tired of thinking about him, talking about him, seeing his messages, dealing with all of this. If I take the deal, it ends. Does it though? I asked gently. Does it really end? Or does it just let him off the hook so he can do this to someone else? Emma's eyes filled with tears. That's not fair. It's not my responsibility to protect other women. I'm barely holding myself together. I can't take on the weight of saving the world from Jonathan. I'm not asking you to save the world. I'm asking you to think about what you'll regret more, going through with the prosecution and having to relive the trauma, or taking the easy way out and always wondering if you could have stopped him from hurting someone else. She put her head in her hands. Why does it have to be my choice? Why do I have to be the one who decides this? Because you're the victim. Because you're the one he hurt. The justice system doesn't work without people like you being willing to stand up and tell their stories. Patricia's voice came through the phone speaker. Emma, I want to be clear about something. If you take this deal, that's valid. That's okay. You don't owe anyone your trauma. You don't owe the world your pain. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. But I also want you to know that we have an incredibly strong case. The video evidence alone is damning. The witness statements. The photos. The prior history you've disclosed. If this goes to trial, there's a very high likelihood of conviction. And if he's convicted, he's looking at 3 to 5 years minimum. Probably more with the strangulation threat included. Emma was quiet for a long time. I wanted to tell her what to do. I wanted to make this decision for her because I could see how much it was hurting her to have to choose. But this wasn't my choice to make. This was hers. Can I have some time to think about it? She asked finally. Of course. I'll tell them we need until the end of the week. After we hung up, Emma went to her room without another word. I heard her door close, heard the sound of her crying through the walls. I wanted to go to her, to comfort her, but something told me she needed to be alone with this. She needed to figure out what she could live with. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Jonathan, about how he'd probably been offered deals like this before. How Vanessa had pressed charges and he'd gotten out of them. How many other women there might have been before Vanessa, before Emma. How many more there would be after if Emma let him walk away from this. But I also thought about Emma. About how fragile she still was. About how much she'd already been through. About whether forcing her to testify, to go through a trial, to face Jonathan in court, would break her completely. Was justice worth destroying my daughter? Was protecting future victims worth sacrificing Emma's mental health? I didn't have answers. Only questions that kept me awake until the sky started to lighten. The next morning, Emma was already up when I came into the kitchen. She looked like she hadn't slept either. She was sitting at the table with her laptop open, staring at the screen with an intensity that made me nervous. What are you doing? Research. I've been looking up Jonathan's ex-girlfriends. The ones I could find on social media. The ones from before Vanessa. My heart started pounding. Emma. I found 3 women. 3 that I can identify from his old photos and tags. And I messaged them. All of them. I said I was his ex, that I'd experienced abuse from him, and I asked if they'd be willing to talk to me about their experiences with him. Emma, did you talk to Patricia before doing this? No. I just needed to know. If I'm going to make a decision about whether to prosecute, I need to know the full scope of who he is. What he's done. As if on cue, her laptop pinged with a notification. She clicked on it and her face went pale. One of them responded. I moved to stand behind her, reading over her shoulder. The message was from a woman named Kelly Martinez. It was long, detailed, and it was horrifying. Kelly described a relationship with Jonathan that had lasted almost a year, about 5 years ago. She described the same pattern Emma had experienced, charming at first, then controlling, then violent. She described him choking her during an argument. She described him threatening to ruin her career if she told anyone what he'd done. She described finally escaping and moving to a different state to get away from him. She described years of therapy to recover from what he'd done to her. And then at the end, she wrote, "If you're considering pressing charges, Please do it. Please. I didn't have the courage to follow through when I had the chance. He convinced me to drop the charges. He promised me he'd changed, that he'd get help, that it would never happen again. And then I saw him 2 years later with a new girlfriend, and I saw the way he grabbed her arm in public, and I knew I'd made a mistake. I knew I'd let him walk away so he could do it all over again to someone else. I've had to live with that guilt ever since. Don't make my mistake. Don't let him do this to another woman. Emma read the message 3 times. Then she closed her laptop and looked at me. I'm not taking the deal. Relief flooded through me. Are you sure? No. But I know it's the right thing to do. And I know if I take the easy way out, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Not just because of Kelly or Vanessa or whoever comes after me, but because I'll know I let him win. I'll know I was too scared to stand up to him. And I can't live with that. I can't be that person. I pulled her into my arms and held her tight. I'm so proud of you. Don't be proud yet. I might fall apart during the trial. I might completely break down. Then you'll break down and we'll put you back together. But you're doing the right thing. And I'll be there with you every step of the way. She called Patricia and told her the decision. Patricia actually cheered on the phone. You have no idea how much I was hoping you'd say that, she admitted. I've been doing this for 15 years and cases like this, with this much evidence, they almost never make it to trial because victims take the plea deal. But when they do go to trial and get convictions, it sets precedent. It sends a message. It makes other victims more likely to come forward. When would the trial be? Probably 6 to 8 months from now. Which gives us time to prepare. Time to build an even stronger case. And Emma, I'm going to reach out to Kelly and Vanessa and see if they'd be willing to testify. If we can establish a pattern of behavior, it strengthens our case significantly. After the call, Emma looked exhausted but also somehow lighter. Like she'd been carrying something heavy and had finally set it down. I need to tell you something, she said. About the messages. From Jonathan. My stomach dropped. What about them? I responded to one. Last night. When I couldn't sleep and I was feeling weak and I was thinking about taking the plea deal. I texted him back. Emma. I know it was stupid. I know I shouldn't have. But I did. And I need to tell you what I said because if I don't, I'll feel like I'm lying to you again. What did you say? I asked him why. Why he did it. Why he hurt me. Why he couldn't just love me the way I loved him. My heart broke for her. For the part of her that still needed answers from someone who would never be able to give them. What did he say? He said it was my fault. That I pushed him too far. That I knew his triggers and I used them against him. That if I'd just been less dramatic, less emotional, less everything, he never would have lost control. He said he loved me more than anyone ever would, and I was throwing it away because I couldn't accept him for who he was. Emma. I know it's bullshit. I know that's not how love works. But God, Mom, some part of me wanted to believe him. Some part of me wanted to believe that if I'd just been better, been different, been enough, none of this would have happened. That's the abuse talking. That's what he trained you to think. But Emma, listen to me. There is nothing you could have done differently. There is no version of you that would have been enough for him. Because the problem was never you. The problem was always him. She nodded, crying again, always crying these days. I blocked his number. All his numbers. I told him never to contact me again. And then I forwarded the whole conversation to Patricia and the police. Good. That was the right thing to do. I'm scared, Mom. I'm scared of the trial. I'm scared of facing him. I'm scared that the jury won't believe me or that his lawyers will make me look like I'm lying. I'm scared that even if we win, he'll get out eventually and he'll come after me. I'm scared of everything. That's okay. Being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're smart. But Emma, you're not doing this alone. I'll be there. Patricia will be there. Kelly and Vanessa, if they agree to testify. You'll have an entire team of people who believe you, who support you, who are fighting for you. Why are you being so nice to me? After everything I did to you, after cutting you out of my life, after treating you like garbage, why aren't you making me pay for that? It was a fair question. And I'd asked myself the same thing dozens of times over the past few weeks. Because I realized something, I said slowly. For months, All I wanted was for you to understand how much you hurt me. I wanted you to feel guilty. I wanted you to beg for my forgiveness. I wanted power over you the way you'd had power over me. And then when you actually needed me, when you were broken and scared and desperate, I had that power. I could have withheld my love. I could have made you grovel. I could have punished you the way you'd punished me. Why didn't you? Because that would have made me just like Jonathan. Using someone's vulnerability against them. Using their need for love as a weapon. Withholding care as punishment. That's not who I want to be. That's not what love is supposed to look like. She looked at me with something like awe. How did you get so wise? Years of therapy and a lot of mistakes, I said wryly. But mostly I just thought about what kind of relationship I want with you. And I realized that revenge might feel good for a minute, but it wouldn't heal us. Only honesty and forgiveness and choosing each other, every day, even when it's hard, that's what heals. I don't deserve you. You're my daughter. Deserving has nothing to do with it. We sat together in the quiet of my kitchen, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt something like hope. Hope that we could rebuild. Hope that Emma could heal. Hope that the justice system might actually work the way it was supposed to. Hope that this story might have something like a happy ending after all. But I also knew the hardest part was still ahead. The trial. The testimony. Emma having to face Jonathan again. All of that was coming. And all I could do was be there for her when it did. The months leading up to the trial were some of the hardest of our lives. Emma was still living with me, still rebuilding, still in therapy 3 times a week. She'd started working again, her company had been incredibly supportive, letting her work from home, giving her whatever flexibility she needed. Slowly, very slowly, she was starting to resemble the person she'd been before Jonathan. Or maybe not the person she'd been, but someone new. Someone stronger. Someone who'd been through hell and come out the other side. Both Kelly and Vanessa had agreed to testify. Patricia had worked some legal magic to get their testimony admitted as evidence of a pattern of behavior. The prosecution's case was strong. Overwhelming, even. But Jonathan had hired one of the best defense attorneys money could buy, and we all knew this wasn't going to be easy. The trial was set for early December, 6 months after the wedding that never was. The media attention was intense. The viral videos had made this a national story. Court TV wanted to broadcast it. Reporters were trying to interview Emma. Patricia had advised us to say nothing, to let the evidence speak for itself, but that didn't stop the press from camped outside the courthouse or from tracking down everyone who'd been at the wedding. Some of Emma's former friends gave interviews. Some were supportive, talking about how charming Jonathan had seemed, how none of them had suspected he was capable of violence. Others were less kind, suggesting Emma was exaggerating, that she was trying to ruin Jonathan's life because she regretted the marriage. Those interviews hurt Emma deeply, but Patricia said they actually helped the case. It shows how good he is at manipulation, she explained. Even after everything, even with video evidence, he still has people defending him. That's how abusers operate. They cultivate a public persona that's so convincing that people can't believe they're capable of violence. The night before the trial started, Emma couldn't sleep. I found her at 2 in the morning sitting in the living room, staring at nothing. Want some tea? I offered. She nodded and I made us both chamomile, the same way I'd been making it for her since she was a child. We sat together in the dim light of the kitchen lamp and didn't talk for a while. What if I freeze up on the stand? She finally asked. What if I see him and I can't do it? Then Patricia will ask for a recess. We'll step outside. You'll breathe. You'll remember why you're doing this. And then you'll go back in and you'll finish. What if the jury doesn't believe me? They will. The evidence is too strong. The videos, the photos, the witness statements. All you have to do is tell the truth. What if telling the truth isn't enough? I didn't have an answer for that. Because sometimes it isn't. Sometimes abusers get away with it. Sometimes the system fails. Sometimes justice doesn't get served. But I couldn't tell Emma that. Not the night before she had to walk into that courtroom and face the man who'd hurt her. It will be enough, I said instead. It has to be. The first day of trial was a circus. Cameras everywhere. Protesters with signs, some supporting Emma, others defending Jonathan, claiming he was being railroaded by the #MeToo movement. Security was tight. We had to enter through a side entrance to avoid the crowd. Inside the courtroom, everything felt surreal. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Reynolds. The jury, 12 people who would decide Jonathan's fate. The prosecutor, a sharp young man named David Harrison who specialized in domestic violence cases. Jonathan's defense attorney, Robert Chen, who looked like exactly what he was, expensive and dangerous. And Jonathan himself. Sitting at the defense table in a perfectly tailored suit, his hair neatly styled, his face arranged in an expression of wounded innocence. He looked nothing like the man in the videos from the wedding. He looked like a victim. Like someone who'd been wrongly accused. Like someone who couldn't possibly be capable of violence. Emma's hand gripped mine so tightly I lost feeling in my fingers. "I can't do this," she whispered. "Yes, you can. He looks so normal. Like a good person. What if everyone believes him instead of me? Look at me, Emma. Look at me, not at him." She tore her eyes away from Jonathan and focused on my face. "You know the truth. I know the truth. Everyone who was at that wedding knows the truth. His lies don't change reality. They just reveal who he really is. And the jury is going to see that." The trial began with opening statements. David Harrison laid out the prosecution's case in stark, simple terms. Jonathan Reed was a domestic abuser who had systematically controlled, isolated, and ultimately assaulted Emma Thompson. The evidence would show a pattern of escalating violence. The video from the wedding showed the culmination of months of abuse. The testimony would reveal a man who hid behind a charming facade while destroying the woman he claimed to love. Then Robert Chen gave his opening statement, and I felt my blood run cold. He was good. Terrifyingly good. He painted Jonathan as a man who'd made one terrible mistake in a moment of stress and alcohol-fueled poor judgment. He suggested that Emma was exaggerating the relationship history to justify leaving Jonathan at the altar. No, wait, leaving him after the altar, after she'd already gotten what she wanted from the relationship. He hinted that Emma was influenced by a bitter, lonely mother who'd never approved of Jonathan. He suggested this whole prosecution was revenge, not justice. And he said all of it while looking sympathetic. Reasonable. Like he was just asking questions, just presenting another side of the story. Like maybe, just maybe, the real victim here was Jonathan. I wanted to stand up and scream. But Emma's hand in mine held me in place. The prosecution called its first witness, one of the groomsmen who'd pulled Jonathan off Emma at the wedding. He described what he'd seen in clear, damning detail. The defense cross-examined him, trying to suggest he'd been drunk, that maybe he'd misinterpreted what he saw, that maybe Jonathan had been trying to embrace Emma and she'd pulled away awkwardly, causing what looked like violence but was actually just a clumsy interaction. The groomsman didn't budge. "I know what I saw. He had her hair in his fist. He was screaming at her. It took 3 of us to get him off her. That wasn't a clumsy embrace. That was assault." They brought in the wedding photographer next, who showed the photos and videos he'd captured. The defense tried to have them excluded, arguing they were inflammatory and prejudicial. Judge Reynolds allowed them, noting that the jury needed to see the evidence. When the videos played in court, showing Jonathan grabbing Emma's hair, showing the rage on his face, showing Emma's terror and pain, the courtroom went silent. You could feel the shift in energy. The jury members' faces changed. Some looked horrified. Some looked angry. One woman had tears in her eyes. Robert Chen tried to recover during cross-examination, suggesting the videos didn't show context, didn't show what Emma had said to provoke Jonathan, didn't show the full story. But the damage was done. The jury had seen what they needed to see. Day 2 was when Vanessa testified. She was nervous but strong, describing her relationship with Jonathan, the pattern of control and abuse, the night he choked her. The defense tried to paint her as a scorned ex-girlfriend with an axe to grind. But Vanessa had her old police report. She had hospital records from when she'd gone to the ER claiming she'd fallen. She had texts from Jonathan apologizing, promising to change, begging her not to leave. Kelly testified on day 3. Similar story. Same pattern. Same cycle of abuse and apology. Same charm that turned to control that turned to violence. The defense tried to argue that none of this was relevant to Emma's case, that these were separate incidents with no connection. But Patricia had done her homework. She showed texts where Jonathan used the exact same phrases with all 3 women. "You made me do this. If you loved me, you wouldn't push me. I love you more than anyone ever will. Word for word. Line for line. Like he was reading from a script. By day 4, when it was Emma's turn to testify, the prosecution had already built a damning case. But we all knew Emma's testimony was crucial. She was the victim in this case. Her words would carry more weight than anyone else's. I sat in the courtroom and watched my daughter walk to the witness stand. She looked so small up there. So vulnerable. When she was sworn in and sat down, her hands were shaking. David Harrison started gently, asking her to describe how she'd met Jonathan, how the relationship had progressed. Emma's voice was quiet at first, but as she talked, she grew stronger. She described the early days when everything seemed perfect. Then she described how things had changed. How Jonathan had started criticizing her clothes, her friends, her family. How he'd isolated her. How the first time he'd grabbed her roughly, she'd made excuses for him. How it had escalated from there. Can you describe what happened at your wedding reception? David asked. Emma took a breath. We were at our table. Someone made a joke about Jonathan being whipped now that he was married. Everyone laughed. Jonathan laughed too, but I could tell he was angry. I could always tell. There was this look he'd get in his eyes. And I said something, I don't even remember what, something trying to lighten the mood, and he grabbed my wrist under the table. Hard. Hard enough to bruise. She held up her hand, where the faint yellow remains of a bruise were still visible 6 months later. I pulled away. I told him to stop. And he just snapped. He grabbed my hair and pulled me backward out of my chair. He was screaming at me, calling me names, saying I was humiliating him, that I always had to make everything about me. I remember thinking this was it, this was how I was going to die, at my own wedding with everyone watching. And then people pulled him off me and the police came and it was over. Why didn't you leave sooner? Before the wedding? Because I loved him. Because I thought I could fix him. Because he'd convinced me that the abuse was my fault, that if I was just better, just different, he'd go back to being the man I fell in love with. And because by the time I realized how bad it was, I was so isolated that I didn't have anyone to turn to. I'd pushed away my mother, my friends, everyone who might have helped me see clearly. I was trapped, and I didn't even fully realize it until it was too late. Then came the cross-examination. Robert Chen stood up, and I felt Emma tense. This was what we'd all been dreading. He started softly, sympathetically. Miss Thompson, I'm sorry for what you went through at your wedding. That must have been terrifying. Emma just nodded. But I need to ask you some difficult questions. Is that okay? Yes. You said Mr. Reed controlled what you wore. But isn't it true that he frequently bought you designer clothes? That he wanted you to look your best? He wanted me to look how he thought I should look. That's not the same thing. You said he isolated you from your mother. But isn't it true that your relationship with your mother had been strained for years before you met Mr. Reed? Emma hesitated. Yes, but... And isn't it true that you chose not to invite your mother to your wedding? That was your decision, not Mr. Reed's. He influenced. Please answer the question. Did you make the decision not to invite your mother? Yes, but he... Thank you. Now, you've testified that Mr. Reed grabbed you roughly on several occasions. But you never reported any of these incidents to police, did you? No, because... And you never sought medical attention for any injuries, did you? They weren't the kind of injuries. So there's no medical record of any abuse prior to the wedding. No police reports. No documentation at all except your word. Patricia objected, badgering the witness. Sustained, Judge Reynolds said. Mr. Chen, let her answer. Fine. Miss Thompson, why didn't you report the prior incidents? Because I was ashamed. Because he'd convinced me it was my fault. Because I was scared. Because that's what abuse victims do, they hide it and make excuses and try to protect their abuser. That's what I did. That's what I'm not proud of, but it's the truth. Robert Chen tried for an hour to break Emma down, to find inconsistencies in her story, to suggest she was exaggerating or lying. But Emma held firm. Every question he asked, she answered honestly. Every trap he set, she avoided. By the end, she was exhausted and crying, but she hadn't wavered. When she was finally dismissed, she walked back to sit with me and collapsed against my shoulder. Did I do okay? You were perfect, I whispered. The rest of the trial was technical testimony. The police officers who'd arrested Jonathan. The paramedic who'd treated Emma at the scene. Expert witnesses on domestic violence and trauma bonding. And then, finally, closing arguments. David Harrison was passionate and precise. He walked the jury through the evidence, piece by piece, building an undeniable case. Robert Chen was smooth and persuasive, planting seeds of doubt, suggesting alternate interpretations, appealing to the jury's sympathy for a young man whose life was being ruined over one mistake. And then it went to the jury. The waiting was torture. We couldn't leave the courthouse in case the jury came back quickly, but we also couldn't stay in the courtroom. We sat in a small witness room, just Emma and me, while Patricia paced outside making phone calls. What if they don't believe me? Emma asked for the 100th time. Then we appeal. But Emma, they're going to believe you. How could they not? 3 hours passed. Then 4. Then 6. The longer it took, the more nervous we got. Patricia said a quick verdict usually meant conviction. A long deliberation could mean anything. Finally, after 8 hours, word came that the jury had reached a verdict. We filed back into the courtroom. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. Emma's hand in mine was ice cold. The jury foreman stood up. Judge Reynolds asked if they'd reached a verdict. We have, Your Honor. What say you? On the charge of assault in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of attempted strangulation, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of domestic violence, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom exploded. People were crying, talking, reacting. Judge Reynolds banged her gavel for order. Emma collapsed against me, sobbing, and I held her while she fell apart. Jonathan's face was stone. He didn't react at all as the judge set a date for sentencing and he was led away by the bailiffs. But just before he left the courtroom, he turned and looked directly at Emma. And he smiled. A small, cold smile that said this isn't over. Emma saw it too. Her sobs intensified. It's over, I told her. It's over, sweetheart. He can't hurt you anymore. But even as I said it, I wondered if it was true. Because men like Jonathan, even when they lose, they find ways to make their victims pay. And that smile had been a promise. A threat. 2 weeks later, Jonathan was sentenced to 7 years in prison. With good behavior, he could be out in 5. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. After the sentencing, Emma and I stood on the courthouse steps, facing the cameras and reporters we'd avoided throughout the trial. Patricia had suggested we make a statement, that it might help other victims to see Emma being strong. Emma stepped up to the microphones. My name is Emma Thompson, she said, her voice steady. For months, I was a victim of domestic abuse. Today, I'm a survivor. If you're in a situation like I was, please know that it's not your fault. It's never your fault. And there are people who will help you. People who will believe you. Don't stay silent like I did. Don't wait until it's almost too late. Get help. Get out. You deserve better. You deserve to be safe. And then we walked away, leaving the reporters shouting questions behind us. We got into my car and we drove home. To my little house with the small rooms and the garden that needed weeding. The house Emma had once been ashamed of. The house that had become her sanctuary. It's really over, she said as we pulled into the driveway. It's really over. What do I do now? Now you heal. You rebuild. You figure out who you want to be, now that you're free. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. Thank you, Mom. For everything. For believing me. For fighting for me. For not giving up on me even when I didn't deserve it. You always deserved it, I said. You just couldn't see it. We went inside together, and for the first time in months, the future didn't feel quite so frightening. It felt like possibility. 6 months after Jonathan's conviction, Emma finally moved out of my house and into her own apartment. Not the place she'd shared with him. She couldn't bear to go back there, even to visit. A new place. A fresh start. A small 1-bedroom in a safe neighborhood with good lighting and security cameras. She'd been in therapy consistently, working through the trauma, learning to trust herself again, slowly rebuilding the pieces of her life that Jonathan had shattered. Our relationship had transformed too. We'd been through joint therapy sessions where Emma had to hear, really hear, how much she'd hurt me. where I'd had to explain the months of pain and exclusion and feeling erased from her life. There were tears. There was anger. There were moments when I wasn't sure we'd make it through. But we did. Because we both committed to the work. To being honest. To not running away when things got hard. Emma apologized. Really apologized. Not the surface level "I'm sorry" she'd given me that first night at my house, when she was desperate and broken and would have said anything to make me help her. But a deep, genuine acknowledgement of what she'd done. Of how she'd treated me. Of the choices she'd made that had hurt both of us. And I forgave her. Not immediately. Not easily. But eventually. Because holding on to that anger, that hurt, that resentment, it was only poisoning me. It wasn't punishing Emma anymore. It was just keeping both of us trapped in the past. Richard had been more consistent than I'd expected. He called Emma every week. Visited once a month. He'd even started attending some of her therapy sessions when the therapist suggested family involvement might be helpful. It didn't undo decades of absence, but it was something. It was more than he'd ever done before. As for me, I'd started dating. Just casually. Nothing serious. A man I'd met at a bookstore, a widower named Tom who was kind and patient and understood when I said I needed to take things slow. It felt strange after all these years of being alone. Strange but also good. Like maybe there was room in my life for something other than being Emma's mother. Emma was doing well. Better than well. She'd gotten a promotion at work. She'd reconnected with some of her old friends, the ones who'd stood by her during the trial. She'd started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, using her experience to help other women recognize the warning signs she'd missed. She was building a life I could actually be proud of, not because of her job or her apartment or any external measure of success, but because she was becoming someone authentic. Someone who knew her own worth. Someone who wouldn't accept crumbs of love and call it a feast. One Saturday in May, almost exactly a year after the wedding that never was, Emma came over for brunch. She'd been doing this weekly, coming to my house, helping me cook, spending time together without any crisis driving it. Just mother and daughter, choosing each other's company. We were sitting in my garden, drinking coffee and eating the quiche I'd made, when Emma brought up something I'd been wondering if she'd ever address. "I need to tell you something about the wedding," she said. "About the day everything happened." I set down my coffee cup. "Okay. You said you were parked near the venue. That you couldn't stay away even though I'd told you not to come. But I've been thinking about that. About the timing. You got there so fast after everything happened. Almost like you were waiting for something to go wrong." My heart started beating faster. This was the conversation I'd known was coming eventually. The one I'd been both dreading and anticipating. "Were you?" Emma asked. "Were you waiting for something to go wrong?" I could have lied. I could have said it was just coincidence, just a mother's instinct, just luck. But we'd promised each other honesty. Complete, uncomfortable, sometimes painful honesty. Yes, I admitted. I was waiting for something to go wrong. Emma's expression didn't change. She just nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something she'd suspected. "Because of Jonathan. Because you knew what he was. Because I'd done research. Because I'd found his ex-girlfriend Vanessa before I ever met him. Because I'd watched you two together and seen the warning signs. Because everything in me was screaming that this man was dangerous and you were in trouble." "Why didn't you tell me? Before the wedding? Why didn't you show me what you'd found?" This was the harder question. The one that made me look at the parts of myself I wasn't proud of. At first, I tried. Not directly, but I tried to express my concerns. And you shut me down. You made it clear that my opinion didn't matter, that I was being dramatic, that you didn't want me involved in your life at all. And then when you didn't invite me to the wedding, when you called me a distraction. I paused, feeling the old hurt rise up even now. Part of me wanted to let you make your own mistake. Part of me wanted you to learn the hard way what happens when you push away the people who love you. So you knew he was dangerous and you let me marry him anyway. No. No, Emma, that's not. I stopped myself. Took a breath. Actually, that's partially true. I knew he was dangerous. I strongly suspected he was abusive. But I didn't know for certain what would happen at the wedding. I didn't know he'd assault you in front of everyone. I thought maybe he'd wait until after, when you were alone. Or maybe he'd managed to control himself that day and the real violence would come later, in private, where no one could see. I thought if I was there, if I was close by, I could be ready when you needed me. But you didn't stop it. You didn't prevent it. I couldn't. Emma, even if I'd crashed the wedding, even if I'd stood up during the ceremony and objected, even if I'd shown you every piece of evidence I'd gathered, you wouldn't have believed me. You would have thought I was the crazy, jealous mother Jonathan had told you I was. You would have gone ahead with the wedding anyway, and you would have cut me out of your life completely. Then when things got bad, when you needed help, I wouldn't have been there because you would have burned that bridge forever. Emma was quiet for a long time. I couldn't read her expression. So you let me walk into a trap because you thought that was the only way I'd ever listen to you. I let you make your own choice. And I made sure I was there when you needed me. I'm not proud of the fact that I couldn't stop it from happening. But Emma, I want you to understand something. Even if I told you everything, even if I'd begged you not to marry him, you were an adult making your own decisions. I couldn't force you to listen to me. All I could do was be ready to catch you when you fell. You were waiting for me to fall. I was terrified you would fall. There's a difference. She stood up and walked to the edge of the garden, her back to me. I sat there, my stomach churning, wondering if I'd just destroyed everything we'd rebuilt. Wondering if this honesty had been a mistake after all. Do you know what the worst part is? Emma said finally, still not turning around. You were right. About all of it. About Jonathan. About what he was. About the fact that I wouldn't have listened if you'd told me. You were completely, totally right, and I hate that. Emma. But I also understand it now. Why you did what you did. If our positions had been reversed, if I'd had a daughter who was about to marry someone dangerous, and that daughter had cut me out of her life completely, I don't know what I would have done either. Maybe the exact same thing. She turned around and I saw tears on her face. I'm not angry at you, Mom. I thought I would be when I finally worked up the courage to ask you about this. I thought I'd feel betrayed or manipulated or something. But I just feel sad. Sad that we were in a position where you felt like you had to watch from the sidelines while I made the biggest mistake of my life. Sad that I'd hurt you so much that you didn't feel like you could come to me directly. Sad that Jonathan had twisted my mind so thoroughly that you knew I wouldn't believe you even if you tried to warn me. I got up and went to her, and we stood together in my garden, holding each other and crying. Not the desperate, broken crying of that first night after the wedding. But a different kind. A healing kind. The kind that comes when you finally let go of the last pieces of pretense and just accept each other exactly as you are, flaws and mistakes and all. I'm sorry, I said. For not trying harder to warn you. For being so hurt by the way you treated me that it affected my judgment about how to handle the situation. For not being perfect. I'm sorry too, Emma said. For everything I did. For how I treated you. For not seeing what was right in front of me until it was too late. For making you feel like you had to protect me from a distance instead of being able to be my mother up close. We stood there until the sun got too hot and we had to move back into the shade. We sat back down at the table and we finished our coffee and we talked about other things. About Emma's new apartment. About Tom and whether I was going to let him meet Emma anytime soon. About Richard and his sudden interest in being a father. About the shelter where Emma volunteered and the women she was helping. I met someone there last week, Emma said. A woman named Ashley. She's 26, been with her boyfriend for 3 years. He choked her during an argument and she finally decided to leave. But she keeps saying she's not sure, that maybe she overreacted, that maybe it was just a one-time thing. And I told her my story. About Jonathan. About the trial. About how it's never just a one-time thing. And she cried and said she needed to hear that from someone who'd been there. You're doing good work, I said. I'm doing the work I should have done before I needed someone to do it for me. I'm being the person I wish I'd had when I was with Jonathan. Someone who'd tell me the truth even when it was hard to hear. Someone who'd believe me even when I couldn't believe myself. Someone who'd show me that getting out was possible. You're being the person you are now. Not the person you were then. That's all any of us can do. Emma reached across the table and took my hand. I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for being there even when I didn't deserve it. Thank you for loving me through the worst version of myself. I don't know how I would have survived this past year without you. You're my daughter, I said simply. That's what mothers do. Even when their daughters are terrible to them. Even when their daughters exclude them from major life events. Even when their daughters choose abusive men over their own mothers. Especially then. Because that's when you need me most, even if you don't realize it. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Emma said something that surprised me. I've been thinking about the future. About dating again eventually, when I'm ready. And I realized something. I have no idea what a healthy relationship looks like. I've never really seen one up close. You and Dad were a disaster. And then Jonathan. She trailed off. I'm terrified of repeating the same mistakes. Of falling for another man like him because I don't know how to recognize the difference between love and control. That's what therapy is for. That's what time and healing are for. You're learning, Emma. You're learning to trust your instincts again. To recognize the red flags. To understand what you deserve. What do I deserve? You deserve someone who makes you feel safe. Someone who encourages you to be yourself, not who they want you to be. Someone who celebrates your relationships with other people instead of trying to isolate you. Someone whose love feels like freedom, not a cage. Did you ever have that? With anyone? I thought about Tom, about our slow, gentle courtship. About how he never pushed, never demanded, never made me feel like I owed him anything. About how being with him felt easy in a way that being with Richard never had. I think I might be finding it now, I admitted. At 62 years old, I think I might finally be learning what it means to be loved well. Emma smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. I hope I don't have to wait that long. You won't. Because you're already ahead of where I was at your age. You're asking the right questions. You're doing the work. You're not settling for crumbs. You're going to be just fine, sweetheart. Better than fine. Before you finish watching this video, I want to tell you something. This story, my story, Emma's story, it's not unique. It happens every single day to women and men all over the world. People get trapped in abusive relationships. People push away the ones who love them. People make terrible mistakes and have to find their way back. And people survive. They heal. They rebuild. They become stronger than they ever thought possible. If you're in a situation like Emma was, please get help. Please reach out. The resources are in the description below. Hotlines, shelters, legal aid. You're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. And you deserve better. If you're in a situation like I was, watching someone you love make dangerous choices, don't give up on them. Stay close, even from a distance. Be ready for when they need you. Because they will need you, eventually. And your presence, your love, your refusal to abandon them even when they've abandoned you. That might be the thing that saves their life. Please share this video. Please check out the other stories in the description. Please comment below with where you're watching from and let me know if this story resonated with you. Because we need to keep talking about these things. We need to keep breaking the silence. We need to keep showing people that survival is possible, that healing is possible, that life after abuse is possible. Emma and I sat in my garden until the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. And I thought about everything we'd been through. The pain. The betrayal. The terror of that wedding day. The long months of recovery. The hard conversations. The slow rebuilding of trust. It hadn't been the story I'd imagined for us. It hadn't been the mother-daughter relationship I'd dreamed of when Emma was born, when I'd held her for the first time and promised to always protect her. But it was real. It was honest. It was ours. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. When Emma left that evening, she hugged me tight and whispered, "I love you, Mom. I'm so grateful for you." "I love you too, sweetheart. Always." I watched her drive away, back to her own life, her own apartment, her own future. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt peace. Not because everything was perfect. Not because all the hurt had magically disappeared. But because we'd survived. We'd made it through to the other side. We'd chosen each other, over and over again, even when it would have been easier not to. That night, I called Tom and told him I was ready for him to meet Emma. He sounded happy, excited, nervous. We made plans for dinner next weekend, the three of us together. And then I sat in my quiet house, in the home I'd bought all those years ago after Richard left, in the place where I'd raised my daughter alone, where I'd cried and struggled and survived. I sat there and I thought about the woman I'd been back then, So afraid, so hurt, so certain that the best thing I could do was close myself off and focus only on being a mother. She'd done the best she could, that woman. She'd made mistakes, but she'd also made sure Emma had every opportunity. She'd sacrificed her own happiness for her daughter's future. And even though that sacrifice had sometimes felt like it was for nothing, like Emma had thrown it all away, it hadn't been. Because Emma had come back. Emma had survived. Emma had learned. And that woman's years of love and dedication had been the foundation that made Emma's healing possible. I was proud of her, that younger version of myself. And I was proud of who I'd become. Someone who could love without losing myself. Someone who could forgive without forgetting. Someone who could be both strong enough to set boundaries and soft enough to offer grace. The journey from that hospital parking lot where I'd found out about Emma's wedding on Facebook to this quiet evening in my garden, it had been long and painful and more difficult than anything I'd ever experienced. But I'd made it. We'd made it. And that, I realized, was the real happy ending. Not everything working out perfectly. Not all wounds magically healing. Not even justice being fully served. Jonathan was in prison, but he'd be out eventually, and the damage he'd done would last longer than his sentence. The real happy ending was simply this: we survived. We chose each other. We did the work. We learned and grew and became better versions of ourselves. We turned our pain into purpose, our trauma into testimony, our mistakes into lessons. And in the end, that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. I hope this story has meant something to you. I hope it's helped you in some way. Please share it with someone who needs it. Check the description for more stories like this one. And remember, no matter what you're going through, no matter how dark it seems, survival is possible. Healing is possible. Love is possible. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And if you're going through something similar, please know, you're not alone. You never were.